Good morning and welcome to this month's meeting of the City of Edinburgh Council. I must draw your attention that this meeting is being filmed for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the General Data Protection Regulation and Data Protection Act 2018. We broadcast Council meetings to fulfil our public task obligation to enable members of the public to observe the democratic process. Data collected during this webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. Generally, the public seating areas will not be filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you should be aware that you may be recorded and images and sound will be stored as above. Children will not be filmed, although sound will be heard. Today's meeting, we are planning to have lunch at approximately 1 p.m. and hand over to Gavin for the order of business.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Order of business, we have a main agenda. We have also circulated the deputation request, the answers to members' questions at item 5 and motions and amendments. Takes 2.1, which is declaration of interest. The Councillors' Code of Conduct requires members to declare any financial or non-financial interest they may have in any items on the agenda. Can I take any interest from the Conservative group, please? From the Labour group, please? The SNP group, please. Mr. Work.
Thank you. Item 9.8. I've been advised to declare a perceived financial interest as I still hold a licence to drive a taxi. So I'll not be taking part in the debate and I'll remove myself from the chamber when this item is discussed.
Thank you, Councillor. Liberal Democrat group, please.
Non-financial interest in 9.7 as a trustee of the Edinburgh Film Guild.
Thank you. And the Green Group, please. And the independent members, please. Thank you. That takes you to item 3. This is a deputation in relation to item 9.8 on the agenda, which is a motion by Councillor Ray on capping private hire car licences. It's a deputation by Unite the Union. Are you happy to hear the deputation?
Good morning and welcome to this morning's Council meeting. The format for this you will be given up to 10 minutes to present your case, your deputation to elected members. We will then have a period should any elected members wish to ask questions or questions answers, and at that point we will then move to take item 9.8 on the agenda straight away. So when you wish to speak, if you just want to press the button and the red light will come on.
Thank you for having us here today. We're here asking for a report to be done about over-provision of private hire vehicles. Sorry. At the moment, there's 1,316 black cabs in Edinburgh. And at present, we reckon there's about 2,500 private hire vehicles. We have concerns that there's not enough work in Edinburgh to cover the private hire vehicle, which then encourages them, or through desperation to make money, they're having to pick up illegally from the streets. So we would like a cap and some control put on the numbers. Sorry.
Just stole my line.
We have a report from SEPA that states that there is a huge amount of emissions created from diesel cars. Diesel cars are mostly private hire vehicles. So the more vehicles that you are allowing to be licensed, the more emissions and congestion is being created in this city. The streets of Edinburgh are our office. So the cleaner they are for the environmental issue is better for our health benefits as well as the residents of Edinburgh. So that's what we would like to look at.
As Scott mentioned at the beginning there, talking about how the increased private hire is actually diluting their work. So they are more tempted to actually legally apply for hire. I work nights and the weekends. I've seen it myself. Young girls being pulled over by private hires, asking them, do you want a lift? That's putting these young people vulnerable at risk. We had 2 girls approach us to say about a couple of weeks ago that they were stopped at a bus stop by a private hire driver and asked for a lift home for sex. I contacted the young girls and put it forward to the council to investigate. Now, obviously, we won't know if that happens or not. So that's a massive concern for us. We've actually spoke to the police as well, and we spoke to Chief Superintendent Stuart Carl, we spoke to Chief Inspector Mark Patterson and Sergeant Jenny Forbes at Road Policing, and they did a targeted campaign for us, gave us the figures of all these, but of course we'll never get to know what the actual complaints were that they did. We did have a meeting in June with the hire trade meeting, and we were told that sexual violence complaints in the city has risen in the last year. We asked for an FOI for that information, but unfortunately you can't tell the difference between a private hire and a taxi.
So, as Jackie has raised, as a trade, we would like more enforcement on the streets of Edinburgh. We would like a dedicated enforcement team. The police at present do the enforcement along with the tax examination centre. The police are under huge cutbacks. The tax examination centre, because they now have to test and issue licences for 2,500 private hire vehicles, as well as the 1,300 black cabs, they're under huge amounts of pressure resource-wise. So if they've not got the resources to be out on the streets because they're in the office testing, the enforcement action is not happening. Edinburgh is the capital city of Scotland. We want our visitors and residents to feel safe and reassured that there's people out on the streets looking after them. And by having an enforcement team, a dedicated enforcement team, that would go around, they would look at black cabs, they would look at private hire vehicles. We're asking for the whole trade to be looked at, not just one specific side of the trade. If there's problems within the black cab trade and an enforcement team would clear it up, we would welcome that greatly. It makes us look better. It makes us provide our service even higher. So as Jackie stated, there was the police action, and it went from the 9th of May to the 23rd of August. There was 401 vehicles stopped, 199 taxis and 202 private hire vehicles. So of the 199 taxis, there was 44 faults found, which equates to 22%, which is too high in my eyes. There was 202 private hire vehicles stopped, 63 faults found, which equates to a 31%. These figures are supplied for Chief Inspector Mark Patterson and Sergeant Jenny Forbes at the Road Policing Unit based in Fetties. So 401 vehicles, it's roughly just over 10% of the whole fleet that has been stopped in a 3-month, 4-month period. We need a lot more. We definitely need more. That's what we would really like as well. And by adding more private hire vehicles onto the system, it cuts back on any enforcement that could be done. So these 401 vehicles, if you add another 100 vehicles onto that, that's got to cut back to maybe 300. We don't know. So we would like enforcement and the cap put in place, or the report done. Edinburgh taxi drivers, we work the city 24/7. We hear the stories, we see things. We can't always report things because anything that's reported requires photographic proof. We can't always get that, but we do see things when we're driving. We hear things. Customers talk to us. We do think there's an issue in Edinburgh. We do. And we want this cleared up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your... I'll just switch you off. There we go. Are there any elected members have any questions? Oh, Councillor Day.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thanks to Scott and Jackie for coming along this morning. I'm grateful that you came to meet me and my colleagues a few weeks back to hear some of the concerns you've got. I think when we met, you mentioned a bit about the signalling. I wonder if you just tell the members in the chamber a bit more about what that means to you and what the impact on your businesses.
Do you want to answer that? Okay, what the private hire actually do is, because, as I say, the work is being diluted because there is far too many of them, so they tend to sit around the streets. And how they get people's attention is they sit with their 4 lighters on and their headlights, so that obviously people can see them out of busy areas. Now, part of their terms and conditions, which is Rule 203, is they're not meant to sit in public place. We have actually spoken to members of the council to reinforce these rules, but nothing seems to be happening with that. We're working on it. So what they do is people approach them and they come up to the window and then they just drive away with them. Obviously, if they get into unpre-booked private hire, they're not insured. So they're putting themselves at risk of an accident or anything else that can happen. So they're definitely 100% at risk of getting into unpre-booked private hire.
Councillor Munro.
Right, thanks very much for the deputation. During the festival, I was at an international festival show, and coming back along George IV Bridge, noticed a whole bunch of private hires on George IV Bridge looking to pick up people coming out from the tattoo. Now, is my experience a common experience for large-scale events throughout the city and the experience of your members and your drivers?
George IV Bridge, Teviot Place, during the festival especially, was a hive for private hire. It's a busy area. We actually found during the festival that there was private hire vehicles spotted from Wolverhampton, Stockport, Manchester, different areas. These plates stick out to a taxi driver, and it's either Edinburgh was very popular in the festival for private hire drivers on holiday, or they were here working, and we believe they were here working. And there's, going back to the enforcement issue, the cab office and the police tend to come out on a Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock, and they'll go around Waverley Bridge, Market Street, the Balmoral, places like this. We want them out after 12 o'clock, Friday night, Saturday night. People are out uptown. Edinburgh's a very vibrant city. It's advertised, come to Edinburgh. Make people feel safe. If there's enforcement on the streets, brilliant. That will help. Anything we can get after 12 o'clock at night, at the weekends especially, is perfect.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'd like to ask the deputation if they could provide any examples of good practice that's happening in other cities in Scotland or the rest of the UK with regards to enforcement and inspection to resolve these types of issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. In Glasgow, they obviously have just secured their cap in April, but the best model, I think, in Scotland is Dundee. They have actually got less private hire. They have got the SQA for their drivers. which we don't have here. Glasgow got the SQA for their drivers too, which includes private hire as well. Every private hire driver in Dundee has to sit their topographical test, which I think is a must. And also they have every private hire driver in Glasgow sorry, I've already said that, about the SQA. So this will all drive up standards for private hire and for taxis as well, for both.
If I could just add to that Glasgow model as well, Glasgow have dedicated 8 enforcement officers that work throughout the night, which is, we're not asking for 8, 2 or 3.
Councillor Arthur.
Thanks for coming along today and giving insight into how what's happening behind the scenes in the industry, I guess, and also for letting us know about that best practice elsewhere in Scotland. I guess really 2 quick questions. I guess the first one is it your understanding that the private hire cab industry itself wants greater regulations and wants a cap on numbers for the very reasons that are affecting you? And the second question is that for a long time in Edinburgh we've been told that the legislation prevents us from capping the numbers of private hire cabs. And I know there's been some doubt about that, but I think the lead that Glasgow have taken, how frustrated has that left the cab industry in Edinburgh feeling?
Hugely frustrating. I believe that coming in 2015, the legislation, Air Weapons Act. So it's been 4 years now that we've waited. So yeah, it's very frustrating. We're dealing in politics is all new to us. We're taxi drivers. We don't understand the process and timescales that it takes, but we're getting used to this. Talking about the first question about private hire, we got a petition on the go to have a cap put in place. We had private hire drivers approaching us. Do you have the petition? We'd like to sign it. It's damaging them more than it's damaging us. People that use private hire vehicles will use private hire vehicles. We've no problem with that, because people that use black cabs use black cabs. But the more private hire vehicles are on a circuit, the less work is between these guys.
Councillor Barry.
Good morning. Thanks very much for your deputation. As you know, I frequently engage with members of the trade, usually through social media, and try to do it in a positive way. I think all members in the Chamber will probably be aware that our black cab fleet has to be wheelchair compliant. That is obviously a great benefit to the city. If the private hire continue to expand and gouge out the market, is there a danger that the black cab trade will become financially unviable and we will lose all the benefits of having our taxi wheelchair compliant vehicles on the road, including of course the city taxi car scheme?
Yes, to your answer, Gavin, it's becoming more and more, with the new Euro 6 standard that's been brought in, the price of a vehicle put on is now based between 37,000 for a base standard rate vehicle, which we've not been having a lot of good reports about. Goes up to £60,000 for the LTXE, the hybrid electric, which in my eyes, it's not proven yet. You're only getting 40 miles to a charge. So every 40 miles you then have to go away, sit and charge. So that's more time off the road. And if you're paying £60,000, it's a lot of money. Whereas a private hire vehicle, I think they're looking at maybe base rate 10 grand. They can stick a Euro 6 and away they go. They've not got the outlay that we have. They've not got the trading standards. They've not put the time in to dedicate to becoming a professional driver.
Councillor Main.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thank you for your deputation. I understand that there are some issues with private car hires, drivers using taxi ranks, which I understand are not legal. Can you give us maybe some information about that and how you think that could be addressed?
No vehicle should be on a taxi rank unless it's a taxi. I think it's section 21, paragraph 7 of the Civic Government Act, so it is a criminal offence. We find now, we used to go back 5 years, you would pull onto a taxi rank, there would be a private hire sitting, You gave him a flash of the lights and I took the guy would drive away because he knew he shouldn't be there. Now there's actually conflict starting because some of these drivers don't understand that they're not taxis. They actually think they're taxis. They'll say, what have I to move for? I'm a taxi. I'm allowed to be here. Because they've not had the training. Taxi rank space in Edinburgh is getting cut back and cut back. We're finding it harder to find space. Waverley Bridge, Market Street, prime example. It's an absolute shambles. And we'll put our hands up. The black cab trade needs to take some responsibility for this. And if there's not enough room in the rank, you move away. But it's frustration with the drivers. The drivers are needing to make money to pay for the big vehicles that they're heavily financially involved in. So it's a knock-on effect.
Okay, unfortunately, the time allocated for questions to the deputations has expired, so apologies to members who had indicated they wish to ask questions. I'd like to thank the deputation for your presentation and also the answers to the questions you gave. If you wish to hear the debate, you can retire to the public gallery and we'll debate the motion straight away. But thank you once again.
That takes you on to item 9.8. This is a motion by Councillor Ray on capping private hire car licences, and we have a coalition addendum as well.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Good morning, Council. Edinburgh Airport hosts 313 flights a day. That's 32 airlines serving 122 destinations. For many of the passengers who have just arrived in this city, the first meaningful engagement they will have will be with a black cab driver. Those passengers new here, we can guarantee that they'll have questions. They'll have a lot of questions. They'll want to know where to eat, to drink, where's the castle, where's the zoo, where's Harvey Nichols, the Britannia, where do you go for live music, which are the best pubs and where's the nightlife. Inevitably, if they're Airbnb, they're going to know where Tesco Express is and where have you put Lidl. If you amplify those questions by 4 during festival and Hogmanay periods, you can marvel at the patience of our black cab drivers, who in their fullest capacity advise on entertainment, cuisine, travel, accommodation, culture, geography, and in their tales of where and to go and where not to go, also on health and safety matters. Our black cab drivers behind a wheel are not just drivers, they are ambassadors for this city, the first point of contact, and the impression that they make matters, and they're aware of that. The standard that they set counts, and a black cab and that driver equals confidence. Confidence in our drivers and confidence in our city. However, at a time when the future hangs on the sugary peg that is Brexit, our black cab drivers, like many others, are struggling. The boom in app-based private hire cars, coinciding as it did with the number of ordinary people forced into the grind of working in a gig economy, has had a significant impact and detrimental impact on the livelihoods of black cab drivers. For those who would argue that the competition is fair and a healthy symptom of a thriving economy, the hire car business is not a competitive business any longer. It is not competitive in this business because it is skewed in this city completely in favour of the private hire car market, and this is simply unjust now. Currently, we have 113 black cabs licensed with 2 licences pending, and this will take the number of black cabs to 1 under their cap, just 1. Meanwhile, 2,447 private hire cars are currently licensed, with new licences being requested weekly and in quite large numbers. Applications are continually being submitted. Now, we have a difference of 1,134 there, so that we're only 182 licences short on private hire cars of making them have 100% more cars on the street than black cabs have. Then there's the other costs, the financial costs and the environmental costs. Many changes are needed to tackle the climate crisis, and the cost to put a black cab that meets current emission standards on the road runs from between 39k and 60k, whereas cost to put a private hire car on the road at the top end is only 15k. As my colleague Gavin said earlier, a private hire car always has to meet accessibility doesn't have to meet accessibility standards, but a black cab does. Still in the environment, the legislation states that a black cab may apply for hire and may be hailed in the street. A private hire car may not. And therein lies another issue, an inability to ply. While a taxi by app has an appeal, the shine has kind of worn off that lately. Reputational damage in major cities, whether because of unreliability, a penchant for price hiking during major crises or incidents in cities, serious questions around the safety of passengers, and a general lack of confidence in a driver who, when you asked to take you to the castle, took you to Craigmillar and not Edinburgh, has declined the demand for the Uber services. But if you're working in a gig economy and driving is your third job, your app hasn't beeped for 10 minutes and your rating's just dropped to 3 stars, are you going to drive around this city causing more pollution, causing more congestion, or are you going to ply your trade and pick up trade illegally on the streets? It's irksome and it's easily dismissed if it's the odd one, but it's not the odd one. It's 1,134 more now, and that is entirely disproportionate. Finally, while we have to acknowledge the contribution our black cab drivers make to our cities and to our economy, they make it in a way that a global private transportation company registered in the Netherlands and Bermuda does not. City cabs pay tax, as do their 950 members and drivers and their 55 call centre staff. Economically conscripted self-employed private hire car drivers working in a gig economy do not pay tax because they do not pay enough money to pay tax. They do not earn enough to pay tax. And I cannot stress often enough that the company that contracts their services does not pay tax in this country or contribute to this city.
To a conclusion, please.
The increase in tourism has meant an increase in demand for hire cars, and there is definitely a place for more services, but the current provision is heavily weighted in favour of private hire cars. Our black taxi drivers serve our city very well. In the interests of parity, I ask you to recognise Unite's call for an over-provision survey on private hire cars and to support this motion. Thank you.
To second the motion, Councillor Burton.
Thanks very much. I just formally second, but I think it would be worth saying that we accept the coalition amendment. Quite happy with the coalition amendment.
To move the coalition addendum, I think it is Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I would like to start my contribution by welcoming the contribution by Councillor Ray, who set out very clearly with lots of numbers and statistics the sterling job that our black cab trade does. I would also like to, in response to Councillor Burgess saying accepting the addendum, which we are delighted about, could I just point out a small amendment to paragraph 3 of our addendum, which should read, instead of Council calls for a report, it should start the report to the Regulatory Committee within 2 cycles, and then instead of 2, replace 2 with should. So it's just minor grammatical, just so it flows better with yours. So I hope that's all right. I'd like to concentrate on the issues around community safety and personal safety. A long, long time ago, way back in the 80s, when I worked in local government in another place in Scotland, Our council was approached by someone newly moved to the area who was offering private swanky chauffeur services, and would the council and the convener and senior people of the council avail themselves of the services being offered to chauffeur around dignitaries, visiting royalty, etc. However, on checking the credentials and the police checks that you have to go through for these kind of things, it transpired that this gentleman had a record and had been convicted of lewd and libidinous practices. Now, that's a long time ago in the 80s, but it just shows you that how important checks are. And in terms of not just women passengers, but also women working in the taxi trade have got to feel safe and not intimidated when they are out trying to provide a good service to people out in our city, late night, during the festivals and so on. In terms of the addendum, I mean, everything is perfectly straightforward, I believe, and I do hope that the convener of the Regulatory Committee will soon receive a response and the guidance that she has called for, so that we can enact that guidance. But in the meantime, if other councils in this city and throughout, other councils in this country and throughout the UK are taking steps to address these serious issues, then Edinburgh, as the capital city, should be doing likewise. And I see no reason why we cannot commence this important survey work in order to inform ourselves as elected members and our colleagues on the Regulatory Committee, so that they can decide what steps to take to address the various issues which have been addressed, which have been highlighted to us today by the deputation and by Councillor Ray's contribution. With that, I move the addendum, Lord Provost. Thank you.
To second the addendum, Councillor Fullerton.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I'm sure members will be puzzled why the convener is not moving this addendum, and I want to tell members that I am too. I don't intend to grandstand, so we'll get on with thanking Councillor Ray for her motion. Members of the Regulatory Committee and myself are aware of the very real concerns that increasing private hire cars we have heard from today from the deputation. Members will be aware that I regularly meet both the taxi and private hire car trade, and I've met members of the Unite branch twice since the summer. Members will also know that the taxi limit has been held at 13.16 since 2011. I heard Unite's concern about public safety, and am acutely aware from dealing with actual cases of the Council's responsibility to protect public safety. I want to reassure members that all complaints are rigorously investigated by Police Scotland and Council officers working in partnership on a daily basis. The increase in complaints from private hire cars can be directly attributed to complaints from the taxi trade, and the increase in complaints against the taxi trade can be attributed to those received from the members of the public. However, the current arrangements with Council officers and police do, I believe, work well. I have, however, prior to the motion being submitted and following my meeting with the trade, asked the Department to bring forward a full report which will allow the Committee and others to better understand this important area, and I hope reassure members and public alike. It is only in the last few weeks that Glasgow has started to refuse licence applications based on the police. Based on this, it is still untested in courts. Officers believe that there is a significant risk of legal challenge which would be difficult to defend. But, as members will see from the proposed addendum, I do believe that despite the lack of guidance, it is appropriate that the Committee considers whether it is in the interest of the City to introduce a limit on the number of private hire cars in the City and the risk this might present. Thank you very much.
Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Lord Provost, I welcome the motion and I welcome the amendment. I think the key thing here is that any move forward should be evidence-based. We have heard this morning quite a lot of anecdotal evidence. Take, for example, the comment from one councillor that there was he saw a group of PHCs parked in George Forth Bridge just before the tattoo came out. Well, you have to wait somewhere if you've got a booking to be able to pick them up. You have to stop to be able to pick someone up. And I don't know, in those circumstances, whether that was illegally parking there or not. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and it is absolutely essential that we base the actions of this Council in this respect on evidence. And that's why I welcome both the motion and in particular the wise words from Councillor Fullerton and the amendment that she has seconded. On a technical point, Lord Provost, can I suggest that the very last paragraph of the motion itself should be deleted, because otherwise we have two paragraphs which essentially speak to the same thing, and so it's tautologous. It's saying things twice, and were you to do that, or were the clerk to do that, or the mover to do that, that would make this, rather than an addendum, an amendment. But that's a technical point. I welcome the proposal that we have here, and I look forward to the evidence that we'll see in front of us.
Councillor Neil Ross.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Can I say I also welcome this motion and the addendum by the administration. The deputation raised serious concerns about enforcement, as we heard. There is no doubt that we need more effective and impartial enforcement across the board for both taxis and private hire cars. The licensing function of the Council, as we know, is funded through licensing fees and does not suffer from the cuts imposed by the Scottish Government on Council funding. So this can be properly resourced and should therefore be addressed by this report. Lord Provost, I'm glad to see that the administration is keen to proceed with an over-provision survey of private hire cars. Whether or not guidance has been issued by the Scottish Government, this suggests to me that guidance is on its way. Has the regulatory convener had a reply to her letter, I wonder? However, we support the motion and the addendum. Thank you.
Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I thought it was just worth clarifying in relation to Councillor Rosie's point. The coalition addendum is aiming to shape the report that's coming back, hence the slight wording change from Councillor Cameron. So I hope, joined together, while it might look a bit inelegant, hopefully it does the job of just shaping the report that's coming back and setting the expectations of what we expect. Can also thank the deputation for their contribution to today's proceedings, because I think it does highlight some of the issues that we need to look at. And just as Councillor Rose said, we then need to go one step beyond the experience that people are feeling on the street and drill down into the detailed evidence so that we can make sound policy decisions. I think some of the suggestions that the union have brought forward, certainly in my meeting with them some months ago, have been helpful, and I've met Councillor Fullerton and others to try and explore some of these further. My end plea to the taxi trade, indeed the union themselves, I did note the representative said, you know, they're taxi drivers, not politicians, and sometimes they get a bit frustrated. I understand that, because our processes sometimes work a bit slowly. We deal with substantial policy changes in months rather than weeks, maybe sometimes too often. But in order to get that sound policy at the end, and specifically when we're talking about quite a large, substantial, hopefully positive policy change out of this process, it will take some time. So my plea, I suppose, to people in the city is no action in days or weeks doesn't mean no action. It means we're taking the time to look at this in detail. And I think the approach set out by the Greens and the coalition, hopefully supported by the whole chamber, does just that.
Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Yes, in relation to this motion, I'd like to thank Councillor Ray for bringing it forward. And I think most of the comments that have been raised by Councillor Cameron and by the convener just highlight how difficult it is at times in working with this issue, regulatory. But I have to say that being on regulatory now for 2.5 years, we work continually with the taxi trade, and I have to say address most of these issues on a very regular basis. And as the Leader of the Council said, it does take time for these things to progress, but I can assure everyone here that we give it our best attention at all times.
Councillor Doggett.
Thank you, Lord Provost. It makes a pleasant change for so many councillors in the chamber to be in agreement, so perhaps we can have that more often. And I want to thank Councillor Ray for bringing the motion to Council's attention, and it's good to support it, and also to support the addendum from the Coalition. And it's particularly useful that we can rest assured that the taxi trade does indeed have the full support of Councillor Cameron. Thank you.
Councillor Howie.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I want to thank Councillor Ray for the motion today, and also Councillor Barry for the point that he raised in terms of wheelchair accessible taxis. It's striking that most taxis in the city are not wheelchair accessible, and I invite elected members to imagine the scenario in August and September if you're out requiring a wheelchair taxi in town, and how much longer you might have to wait. It certainly spoil the outing, I would think. That certainly merits review. Thank you, Lord Provost.
I have no other members showing wishing to speak, so are we agreed the motion, including the addendum? Thank you.
That takes you back to item 4.1, which is the minute of the previous meeting on 19 September, which is submitted for approval as a correct record.
Is that agreed? Thank you.
Then that takes you on to 5, which is questions. 5.1 is a question by Councillor Miller on leaf sweeping.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thanks to the convener for her answer. I just wondered if I could clarify by asking the convener, therefore, if there should be an equalities approach, because the part 4 of the question asks about an impact assessment, and that appears not to have been done. And my understanding was that we did take an equalities approach to all of Council's policies, and I wondered whether that was something which he would consider implementing in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. I would certainly like to see that done. I'm not, as you'll be aware from the rest of the answer, leaf sweeping and clearing of paths and cyclepaths is conglomerated into other services, and it might make it slightly more difficult. But I think, yes, it is important. I think we're all becoming increasingly clear that some of the transport policy issues that surround, for example, the way in which it affects different genders, for example, or different disabilities, is of increasing importance and should be reflected in our policy. It's something that I'll be pursuing with the team. Thank you.
Question 5.2 is by Councillor Osler on parking in front of communal bins.
Thank you very much, and excuse I have not got much of a voice. Thank you, very sweet. Just a quick follow-up to ask, in this instance, as parking in front of bins is a particular problem, especially in very congested areas, would it be a good time to start looking at what our restrictions are around bins so it can be enforced over a longer period? Thank you.
I would like to thank Councillor Osler for her bravery in providing us with a supplementary question. So thank you.
Thanks, Lord Provost. I feel almost like a sense of solidarity with Councillor Osler. I shouldn't ask a supplementary, but I will. For clarification, one aspect of the report is about what's called the problem of urban creep. And that's, for people who haven't read the report yet, it's the loss of green space within existing gardens or grounds. And we know the total loss of green space over the last 25 years in Edinburgh totals more than a mile square, the size of Holyrood Park, in other words. Most of that is urban creep. Now, what the answer says is that much of urban creep, as it's called, is permitted development within the terms of planning legislation, but still requires mitigating measures to deal with excess surface water. So, given that it's permitted development and therefore not under the same level of scrutiny, is the convener satisfied that those mitigating measures are indeed being put in place?
So, thank you, Councillor Corbett, for the question. And I think it was in your leading up to the supplementary, it's important to emphasise a lot of this is in backland development. It's not Holyrood Park, it's not football pitches, so it's important to differentiate. And in that sense, it's intensifying the urban area, and the alternative to that would be greenfield development, which would potentially be even worse. But in answer specifically to the question, as we don't control the permitted development, it's difficult to check actually what is built, but it would not be in compliance with the permitted development rights if they weren't putting the right kind of drainage in, because that's a requirement of that. But we don't actually check that. But I'm happy for this to be considered more through planning committee if that's appropriate in due course. So for now, I hope that answers your question.
Question 5.5 is by Councillor Mowat on the city's global reputation.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'd like to thank the convener for the answer and the clarification of your remarks. Are we to take this to mean that Edinburgh is open to any offer from any promoter, and that it is your opinion that all and every event that is proposed should be supported? And if this is not the case, how do you propose to consult with local members, the community and committee about what and how many events is appropriate, or does anything go?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Lord Provost. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to reiterate this. I haven't just put it in the answer, but I've also sent an opinion piece to the Evening News. It's quite unusual to have a question that's directly directed at an article rather than any kind of policy. But I do appreciate the opportunity to, if you like, set the record straight here on the webcam and indeed in writing on the website and hopefully in the opinion piece tomorrow. First of all, let me be very clear. The answer to the first question is no. I asked myself that question so that I can reiterate that. Am I in favour of capping, of removing the cap on major events in Princess Street Gardens? The answer is no. So any indication that that is not the case is misleading. And I did make that quite clear at the time, and I'm making it clear again now. I absolutely accept that the protection of the gardens has to come absolutely first, and that it should be our first priority. My reference to global reputation was directed in general about how we go forward. But as Councillor Mowat knows, that I have been quite central to making sure that citizens' voices are heard, both in our tourism strategy through the Tourism and Communities Working Group. And for that reason, to answer the second part of the question, is that one of the main things that have come out of that is a full consultation on what we want by way of our winter festivals, both Christmas and Hogmanay. That will be a full consultation. So it's coming to the end of the existing contract, so the time is absolutely right now to look at exactly what citizens want so that we can deliver that in the city. The phrase is quite often used that this is a balance between visitors, businesses and citizens. For me, there's no balance to be struck. We have to put the citizens first when we're looking at what's on offer in the city. That has to be put first and foremost. And the time is right now to look at exactly what citizens want. And that's what we're doing through culture and communities.
Question 5.6 is by Councillor Brown into the climate change event on Friday 20th September.
No supplementary.
Question 5.7 is by Councillor Laidlaw on local authority Brexit funding.
Thank you, Lord Provost. So I thank the Council Leader for his answer, and I can only assume that he shares my confidence that the Prime Minister's Brexit deal will pass the House of Commons, because it does seem surprising to me that, given the estimate in the answer for the cost of leaving the European Union to Edinburgh is £1.2 million, that he seems to feel that the £50,000 allocated by the Scottish Government is sufficient and that we can well afford the £25,000 referred to in his Leader's report from the Council Priorities Fund. So can the Leader perhaps explain why he hasn't written to the Scottish Government to ask for some of the unallocated £97.4 million in local authority funding that has been provided by the UK Government? And does he agree that it's acceptable for the Scottish Government to expect local authorities to write begging letters while the equivalent local authorities in the rest of the UK had that money allocated directly to them? Thank you.
Can I thank Councillor Laidlaw for giving me the chance to elaborate on my answer and for picking up some of the points that he raises. The question that he asked, although I'm sure this wasn't his intention, was a process question. We are, whether the Conservatives like it or not, and I appreciate they put in their budget that we would come out of COSLA. That's their position. It's not the position of the administration. It's not the position of this council. So right now we are members of COSLA, working with our local government colleagues from across the country. And our job right now is to make sure that COSLA are armed with the facts and information of costs that we're incurring so that they can feed into that process from the Scottish Government on our behalf, with the strength of 32 local authorities behind them, not simply one council engaging with the Scottish Government. I think that is the best way of maximising the amount of financial support that we get. I'm astounded that Councillor Laidlaw has mentioned the 25,000 which has supported the resettlement or settlement applications, and they are applications of 1,500 EU nationals, 1,200 of our own Edinburgh residents. I'm astounded that he points to what is one of the most fundamental problems in the Conservatives' judgment in this subject. They are citing £25,000 that we're spending towards supporting people through that process as some sort of bad thing. I'm proud that this council took the decision to spend that money in supporting those 1,500 people, 1,200 of our own residents. And the Chamber will remember that I did write to the UK Government, because what Councillor Laidlaw missed out of that is that this is a Home Office scheme that we were being asked to sign up to. And I wrote to the UK Government saying that we were spending £25,000 and asking them for that money back. They rejected that application. They rejected that request. I am even more astounded that Councillor Laidlaw brings up any element of financial cost in Brexit right now. Just this week, analysis showed Brexit is costing the Scottish economy £3 billion, with significant contributions to the amount of revenue that we will get in the Scottish Government and the consequentials for us as a council. Fundamentally flawed logic from the Tories, as usual. Fundamentally flawed political nous from having the gall to raise it right now. In terms of the Scottish Government, I will say this. As well as working with our colleagues in COSLA to get direct financial support to the Council and the costs that we're incurring, the Scottish Government is putting together other funds and already has committed money to other funds to deal with some of the consequences of Boris Johnson's tumbling Brexit as he fumbles his way through it. The £1.5 million that the Government has already put into ensuring food security during expected price rises from the Conservatives' Gallus blundering forwards is just one example where the Scottish Government and Council are putting enormous amount of effort and resource into making sure that whatever the chaos and disaster that the Conservatives subject this country to, that we are best prepared to protect the most vulnerable in our society. I am amazed that the Conservatives thought they were on solid ground by raising this today, but I thank them for the opportunity to respond.
Final question is at 5.8. It's by Councillor Brown on lamppost wraps.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Not quite sure I can follow that kind of rambling rant. I'd like to thank the convener for her answer. My initial question came from a constituent complaint around the Bootland Market area in my ward following the West Edinburgh Cycle Link drop-in events, which were very well received. This was held on Thursday, the 5th of September. However, just as recent as this morning, these lamppost wraps remain in situ. Can the convener confirm what level of inventory is in place for council-related lamppost wraps, and what pressure can the convener place on departments to have any post-event wraps, such as those in my ward, removed in a timely fashion? Thank you.
I don't have such information as to the inventory of lamppost wraps at my fingertips, as you can probably imagine. I will attempt to get that for you if I can. Clearly, there's been an oversight in this one, and it's incumbent upon the Council to get out there and clear it. But I don't think it indicates anything about policy. It indicates about an error in this particular instance, and it will be cleared as rapidly as possible by the Department. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. An email would also have worked. Thank you.
That takes you on to item 6, the Leader's Report.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. Can I say, first of all, it's good to be back at work serving the city. Can I thank in particular Illy Bird for covering so ably in my 6 weeks of adoption leave, and can also thank Councillor McInnes, Councillor Day and indeed all my colleagues in the administration for the work that they've done during my absence. I think it was quite evident when I came back to work the amount of progress that we made in delivering against the administration programme shows very clearly that we have not missed a beat in delivering for the people of Edinburgh. Trams is moving ahead, a testament to the hard work and skill of the Tram team, and thanks to the robustness of the business case that we approved as a council, I can say that that the case for Tram has not only been met in terms of the expectations that this council approved the project on, but they've been exceeded, and that will be reported back to the council in due course. City Deal has moved forward, which we'll come to later in the agenda. Waste complaints continue to be driven down, still tracking a 5-year low, and just this week right now, we have the lowest level of waste complaints so far this year, and we look to go further in generating further improvement. As we drive towards our net zero, Edinburgh has taken a huge step forward by the reports going to committee tomorrow and outlining the roadmap that we have to not only deal with our own carbon emissions as an organisation, as a council, but a governance mechanism and a roadmap for how all sectors of our economy can contribute towards Edinburgh becoming a net zero city in just 11 years' time. And what that shows, I think, very clearly, is that this is possible and can be done with political and financial will behind it. And with that, I'm more than happy to take questions.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Firstly, can I welcome the Leader back from his adoption leave? I hope it was very successful. But, Lord Provost, I see that the Leader, in amongst the things he's highlighted from his report, also mentions in his report the forthcoming council budget. And, Lord Provost, against a background where, during his absence, his deputy leader was writing to ministers begging for more money, and his finance convener was taking matters to committee and ditching any public consultation on the forthcoming budget because he's unhappy with the results of consultations past, can the leader, 2.5 years into his leadership and 7.5 years into Labour and the SNP jointly running this council, tell us when he will publish a long-term financial strategy for the council?
The 3-year projected budget will be published as part of this budget round. That's our expectation. That's what we're working towards. The council already has a 10-year capital plan showing how we are financing our schools, our communities' needs, how we're financing major road projects, how we're financing a whole host of things that our community relies on. So in terms of the 10-year capital plan, the 3-year revenue plan, I think with all the circumstances and particularly the various elements of chaos that the Conservatives are throwing at us as a nation right now, we are in a pretty good position. If Councillor White can point to a single council that's doing better in the country, willing to listen.
Councillor Staniforth.
Thank you, Lord Provost. As the Leader mentioned earlier, Edinburgh City Council employs around 1,200 EU citizens from outside the UK. The Home Office can't or won't tell us how many of those have successfully applied for settled status, though we do know that only around 25% of EU citizens resident in Edinburgh have registered for settled status. Is it acceptable for Westminster to tell its councils to prepare for Brexit while keeping us in the dark about the scale of the impacts on our workforce?
Can I thank Councillor Staniforth for the question? I think there is a fundamentally bigger question in that, which is why are citizens of our city, citizens of our country, having to apply for the status to be part of the community that they already live in? And that, as I've said before, is an absolute abomination by the Conservatives, and one of the things that should have been changed in the chaos, at least, of Boris Johnson's premiership. But as he can't get anything past the House of Commons, I'd be surprised if he could get anything positive past. In terms of the 11,000 people within the city who have already registered, obviously we're working to support our own staff through that process. If there is information which is available which disaggregates some of that information to allow us to better target and support people in particularly acute sectors of our economy, I'm thinking of social care, for example, who are not just directly employed by the council, but employed in the market, and also in early years that we're looking to deliver a huge expansion in nursery provision across the city. I think that's information that needs to be flagged. We haven't had anything yet which points to an individual problem in terms of the rates being different amongst different sectors of the economy. But Councillor Staniforth is absolutely right. Only 1 in 4 residents who are EU nationals within the capital city so far have registered. It's worth saying that of the 1,500 people who have registered through our own service, about a third of those have done so in the last month. So we are seeing that ramping up as Brexit sort of looks like more of a reality. But we'll absolutely keep a watching brief, not only on the citywide numbers to make sure that EU nationals get the status that they are entitled to and should be absolutely unquestioned, but make sure that our own employees feel supported through that process as well.
Councillor Aldridge.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost, and can I also welcome the Council Leader back and hope he's enjoying his respite from childcare duties today. I'm not sure during his absence whether the Council Leader read a recent column in the Evening News where the Deputy Council Leader proudly stated, quotes, "For the first time, and I stress for the first time since I have been here, we are looking at budget proposals through a poverty lens." Now, Lord Provost, Liberal Democrats have always prioritised tackling poverty in our budget proposals, and whilst we welcome the Coalition's newly discovered approach to tackling poverty, why has it taken Labour and the SNP Coalition over 7 years to take tackling poverty seriously? Or was it simply that the Deputy Leader was bending the truth?
Can I thank Councillor Aldridge, at least for the welcome back anyway. I think what Councillor Day meant, and I have to say I didn't read virtually any newspapers. I didn't read the Evening News once while I was away. It was great for my mental health. The poverty lens that I think Councillor Day was talking about is the lived experience through the Poverty Commission, which is feeding into our thinking in terms of how we look at some of these challenges. Obviously, everything we've done since I've been elected in the last 7-8 years has certainly been focused about protecting the people who need the council services the absolute most. It's why we set up the Poverty Commission, to try and drive some of that lived experience out, to help inform our thinking. It's why I think when you go back and look at the budgets that I've been part of in previous years, I think that's exactly what we've done. Despite the fact we've had a significant financial challenge, I think we've protected the most vulnerable in our communities and invested in areas of our budget like social care, like education, to make sure that people in our communities are best supported. So I don't recognise the statement. I'm sure Councillor Day will thank me for reinterpreting what his words meant. So the answer to your question, I think, is no.
Councillor Day.
Thank you, Lord Provost. The Council Leader will be aware of climate emergencies across the world, and of course be aware of Councillor McClellan's interest in my ward in his little articles today. With no mention of Tory austerity, no mention of benefit caps, no mention of in-work poverty or 0 hours, and of course no mention of Brexit. Would the Council Leader agree with me that Councillor McClellan's time would be better spent trying to convert his climate sceptics, Councillor Rhodes, than writing these little articles?
Having read some of Councillor McClellan's columns, I think his time would be better spent doing almost anything else than writing those columns.
Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Would the Council Leader like to further comment on the adverse and damaging effects on the health and social care sector and the retention and the recruitment of staff caused by the uncertainty of Brexit?
Can I thank Councillor Gordon for the question? I mentioned 2 areas in particular, health and social care and early years, in response to a previous question. The Council is doing an enormous amount of work in resilience planning in these areas in particular to make sure that the labour supply is there. Brexit is a fundamental threat to how we are going to deliver the expansion in early years hours as of next year, assuming Brexit happens, and it's a fundamental threat to the sector of social care in terms of recruitment. Members may have seen or may not have seen the drive towards at-home care within the social care sector, published information just the last few days. That whole drive is going to require additional labour thought of very differently from the conventional NHS and care home sector. So the industry itself will need more staff, and Brexit is a fundamental threat to it. The resilience planning is, I think, having an impact, but the terms of that impact are severely limited, I think, by the way the UK Government is going about the workforce planning elements, and particularly the labour supply elements of their Brexit conduct. So absolutely the two areas in particular most affected. By no means the rest of the Council is excluded from those impacts, and our job is to try and make sure that the disaster that the Tories are subjecting us to is mitigated as best as possible.
Councillor Laidlaw.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I thank the Leader for his report. I want to bring up a different B word, beagles. So I was pleased to see that we are taking lead with this pilot for dog-friendly Thursdays in libraries. As a dog owner myself, as many are in this chamber and across the city, I think it's great, and I'm pleased to see that is being brought forward. I wondered, therefore, if the Leader might be willing, following this pilot, to revisit the issue I brought up in this chamber just over a year ago around the prevention by the Council of a friendly local dog coming into a community centre in my ward. That dog was going to be in the office of the community centre, so I think if we can allow multiple dogs in our libraries, perhaps we can revisit the subject of dogs in community centres.
Can I thank Councillor Laidlaw for the question? I think it will be worth revisiting once we understand the pilot. However, some of the reasons that we were unable, and were, I think, sympathetic at the time to the ethos of what Councillor Laidlaw was bringing forward previously, but some of those blockers still remain. So the dog-friendly Thursdays will only apply one day a week, for example, so they'll be able to be negotiated around for people with those sort of extreme allergies or fears of those animals. So while it will be worth revisiting, I fear that because of some of the constraints we found facing the last decision, we may not be able to go that much forward in meeting that request. However, we might be able to find additional ways of managing it, depending on the results of the pilot. Of course, the pilot could go horribly wrong.
Councillor Main.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Lord Provost, we're all aware of the unacceptably long waiting lists and waiting time in Edinburgh for mental health services. The Scottish Government in July raised its concerns formally with NHS Lothian and asked them to produce a formal recovery plan. But we have to remember that the Council also delivers mental health services. The Leader is convener of policy and sustainability with responsibility for scrutiny of these Council services. So what action has he taken to seek assurance that the design and delivery of mental health services by the Council is fit for purpose and delivering on its responsibilities?
Can I thank Councillor Main for the hugely important question in terms of the support we provide. The Council supports a number of employees and has actually a very good policy in place to support employees in terms of counselling services and other things through the process. I'm more than happy to follow up directly with officers to see if we are still leading in terms of the benchmarking against other local authorities and other public organisations, because my understanding, certainly from previous conversations with officers, is that Edinburgh is pretty much a high watermark in terms of those services. So I'm more than happy to follow that up, and if it requires additional action or indeed additional scrutiny, I'm more than happy to bring a report as part of general workforce management stuff to either financial resources, which might be the most appropriate place, or indeed policy and sustainability.
Councillor Glower.
Thank you, Lord Provost. In his verbal report, the Council Leader mentioned the low level of complaints about waste collections. Given the nature of his ward, he might not be as aware as I am of the delays in issuing brown bin stickers to residents who paid months ago for this paid-for service. What explanation can he offer for these delays, and what measures will he be taking to ensure that paid-up residents don't miss a second collection as they have already missed the first one?
Can I thank Councillor Glower for raising this, because certainly I wasn't aware, it's not come past me that anybody has missed out. I certainly got my sticker on time in advance of the October change. More than happy to look into individual circumstances and ensure that is accelerated as quickly as possible. I'm not entirely sure what went wrong, as it's not hit me, but I'm more than happy to look into it and get back to Councillor Gloria.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you for your report and welcome back from your adoption leave. My question is on a familiar theme and linked to your remarks about looking ahead to the budget setting exercise. It is given greater urgency by the audit report at item 8.4 on today's agenda. In his absence, the Deputy Leader of the Council issued a letter on 18 September seeking a meeting with the Finance Minister to make the case for full and fair funding for Edinburgh. I realise your inbox will be very full. Has a reply been received? Has a date been set to meet? Do you agree with me that the audit report makes the case for full and fair funding for Edinburgh even more urgent?
Can I thank Councillor Munro for the question? I'm never going to stop arguing for fair and full funding for this local authority in terms of funding the pay uplifts, in terms of funding a whole host of other budget pressures that we have, and I'll continue to make that case along with literally all 31 other council leaders across the country. I believe there's some email ping-pong to get a date for the meeting, so I believe that is in train, and when Councillor Day and I do get a date, I'll let Councillor Munro know as a first instance to put his mind at ease.
Councillor Rankin.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost, and thank the Leader for his report. The Leader will recall an article in the Evening News earlier this month about masonry and falling roof materials in the city. Some 179 cases were reported to the Council's Shared Repairs Service last year, leading to remedial action. However, the figures suggest that the problem of inadequate property maintenance is citywide and increasing. I'm sure the Leader will agree with me that although this is a Scotland-wide problem, it's of particular concern in Edinburgh, and that the last thing we want is to see injury or worse to any member of the public. Will he therefore give me an assurance that the Council, along with the Scottish Parliamentary All-Party Group on Tenement Maintenance, will continue to press the Scottish Government for the necessary legislative powers to ensure that owners take full responsibility for maintaining their properties? And will he also join me in commending the Shared Repairs Service for the prompt information on shared repairs it provided to the public through the Evening News, and agree that all parties in this chamber, all parties, should support the valuable service that we have in the Shared Repairs Service?
Can I thank Councillor Rankin for the question? I absolutely agree on the merits of the Shared Repair Service, particularly the early intervention information which has been put out by the service, which is helping landlords and property owners across the city understand their responsibilities better and allow them in helping them facilitate work to their buildings. Absolutely, I agree with Councillor Rankin that this is being looked at a national level in terms of parliamentary working group. Our team, our shared repairs team and our officers are feeding into that process. I would expect that to come out with more robust challenge to people who own properties, not just in Edinburgh but across the country, in terms of building maintenance, because I agree with Councillor Rankin, with such a historic city, it's not only worth protecting because of its own built environment, but it's absolutely crucial that the buildings are not causing public safety issues across the capital. It is worth just reiterating very strongly that the condition of buildings in the city that are in private ownership are the responsibility of those private owners, and everyone has a responsibility to make sure that their own building, whether it be a building which is accessed by the public or entirely private, is not causing those issues and is safe, and there's no issues like falling masonry, roof tiles flying off and all that kind of thing. So it is worth just reiterating, and I hope the whole chamber would agree with that sentiment, the need for property owners to take care of their properties is absolutely paramount.
Councillor Webber.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and welcome back, Council Leader. Let me take my badge off there so it clatters off the microphone. Can the Leader of the Council share his thoughts with the Chamber today on the very real reputational risk that many elected members across this chamber are continuing to place the Council under by their persistent and continued use of the Council taxi account? The guidelines are clear, but not clear enough, it seems. Surely following the recent press coverage, albeit you may not have read it, it must be apparent to them and our residents and the citizens of Edinburgh do not see this as acceptable or indeed appropriate use of taxpayers' money, as after all, other methods of public transport are reasonably available. Further, I'd be interested in his thoughts regarding the justifications that have been made by elected members for their persistent use. What I cannot understand is why these elected members continue to go to the bother of using a very complex method of booking taxis, calling a special number, quoting a contract number and an account name, giving your name and pick-up destination, when many others just pick up their phone and with 2 clicks can book a taxi on their app and it comes off against their own personal debit or credit card. For all intents and purposes, they are using taxpayers' money as their own petty cash, and it seems in some instances not repaying it. So does the leader now agree with me, as I suggested at the last meeting to the finance convener, that the taxi account must be suspended, and if there be any legitimate requirement for elected members to use taxis, they should be booked for and paid for themselves and claimed back via an expense claim? Finally, does he not agree that it is important that we uphold our integrity and protect, where possible, the reputation of the Council? Thank you.
Can I thank Councillor Webber for the question? The taxi use, I think, has to be an enabling use. It has to be a use that is enabling a member to fulfil the role in whatever guise they have as a local ward member or in any other function around the city. I'm not going to get into a specific about any individual member's use or criticise anyone, because I think that's a matter for their individual, and I think it's a matter for the electorate. And if the electorate has an issue with someone's taxi use for health reasons, which I think would be fairly unjustified actually, or has a problem with people using it in any other guise, I think that's a matter for the electorate. I myself take bus more often than anything else, but that is not to say that I'm going to stand here and criticise anybody else. I think the Finance Resourcing Convener has already agreed to a review, which I think is the most appropriate way forward for this, so that all of us can understand the process that we go through, and the Council is in a firmer position, because to give Councillor Webber credit for the question she initially asked some months ago, it did expose a fundamental issue in how we were recording information and attributing it to individual elected members. So, all of that said, I think the process does need to be reviewed to ensure that everyone has clarity on the process of use and indeed the information that comes through as a result of use.
Councillor Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thank the Leader for his report and welcome him back. When he's away, I appreciate he may not have been aware that the acting Leader did contact the Scottish Government asking for fair funding for this city. Can the Leader tell us if he has received any response from the Scottish Government to that request by the acting Leader since he's returned?
Can I thank for the question? I did say in response to Councillor Munro that following the request for a meeting, there is now negotiation. There's diaries being compared between ourselves and the Cabinet Secretary. I'd expect that meeting to happen at some point in advance of the budget first being set or announced by the Scottish Government in December. So I would expect a meeting to take place in November.
Councillor Johnson.
Lord Provost, I'd like to ask the Council Leader about Coalition Commitment 49 to limit council tax increases to 3% a year until 2021. Given we now know that during next year's budget consultation the people of Edinburgh won't be asked about this as part of the consultation process, does he still stand by this coalition commitment?
Can I thank Councillor Johnson for the question? Obviously, we stood on that as a platform. If we do have cause to change that, it will be part of the suite of budget proposals that come back, and we'll be speaking to the city about all a range of options. I should say I'm not going to comment on any specific budget ask, and the reason for that is quite simple. We are going to put forward a budget which deals with absolutely everything. It deals with council tax, it deals with all funding of services, and we'll be putting forward as one package, one suite of options. And I'm not going to be drawn into, neither as the finance convener, about commenting on one proposal or another proposal. So I appreciate speculation is absolutely rife, but without the full suite of options which we'll be putting forward, I don't think any of them will particularly make sense. So I'm not going to comment on any individual application. Obviously, the government has already changed the policy permissions in relation to council tax everything, including taxation of council tax and other things, will come forward in the suite of proposals later this year.
Councillor McInnes.
Thank you, Lord Provost. First of all, can I say thank you for as part of your verbal report, your welcome for the improved waste service environment that we're now enjoying. But on top of that, I was wondering if you welcomed the introduction of new recycling on the go facilities in city centre locations as a result of our successful partnership with the charity Hubbub, launched on Tuesday, which previously worked with us on the development of the Neat Streets initiative.
Can I thank Councillor McInnes for the question? The next 6 months, I think, will be an exciting one for bins in the city, because the whole drive will be about encouraging recycling and trying to encourage behaviour change by thinking creatively about how people approach their nearest bucket. We even have bins that are going to be blowing bubbles and trying to encourage that behaviour change, because part of the problem of bins is about council collection. We accept that and we will continually drive to improve it. But a big part of it is about behaviour change in the city. In the 6-month campaign that we're going to be running, we'll hopefully get buy-in from the whole city in taking it forward. We'll improve behaviour change and improve the quality of the environment of the entire capital city.
Councillor Doggett.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and welcome back to the Council Leader. I'm not sure if it's an improvement or not. On last month, we'll leave the viewer to decide. On the 27th of June, in response to a question from Councillor Gordon about sick kids, the Council Leader said, and I quote, he welcomed that the Scottish Government delivered this in the way and timescales that they did. So does he still stand by that answer? And in light of the sick kids' financial implications for NHS Lothian and the Audit Commission's report into the financial failings at NHS Lothian published this week, will he also give a firm commitment that the Council will meet all of its requirements for funding health and social care for 2020-2021 and to take care out of crisis?
Can I thank Councillor Doggett for his multifaceted question? I did come to the last council meeting and sat at the back because there were things like the city centre transformation that I wanted to vote for. I think I clocked at that meeting that Councillor Doggett referred to the position of leader as an exalted position, and I didn't know that he held me in that high esteem, Lord Provost, but it was much appreciated anyway from my sedentary position. In terms of sick kids, obviously there were fundamental failings there, and the Health Secretary, I think, has done exactly the right thing in how she has approached this, in terms of driving it forward, making sure that there's not one stone left unturned in terms of how that building will be brought back into use. In terms of the starting point, I think, of the question in terms of funding for social care and NHS services from the council side, I think it is important that we get behind the plan which the IJB is now working to make sure that services continually to improve, and I'm pleased to report that they are continuing to improve. But it is also true that in the shift of care and the shift and balance of care from care homes and hospital to in-home provision doesn't just put pressure on the council to fund that transformation and fund those services, but puts pressure on all three partners to come together and find a model that works to transform care, genuinely transform care, and improving outcomes for people. So I'm not going to give a commitment to fund whatever number is asked for by the IJB, but I will give a commitment that this council will stand with the IJB and NHS in trying to ensure that that plan is fully deliverable.
Councillor Booth.
Thank you, Lord Provost. The latest statistics suggest that nearly 1 in 5 households in the capital are suffering from fuel poverty, where the combination of low incomes, energy inefficient homes and high fuel costs mean that people can't afford to adequately heat their homes. This can have devastating impacts on physical and mental health and can lead some families to choosing between turning the heating on and putting a hot meal on the table. The rollout of universal credit is likely to mean that the impact of fuel poverty will be even greater in the coming winter months than in previous years. What action is the Council taking to prepare for this likely increase? And does the Council leader agree with me that nobody should have to choose between heating and eating?
Can I thank Councillor Booth for the question? Absolutely, I agree with that. I think our benefits team, Housing Revenue Benefits team, do a fantastic job in making sure that people have access to the benefits that they need to take them through those circumstances, and are continuing to develop up new ways of people accessing that support. I would say there's local initiatives that are helping people through those challenging circumstances. I know at the weekend in Leith, there was an exercise, which Councillor Booth will be aware of the community coming together to give household items and things away to people to try and make some of these decisions easier. But absolutely, it's fundamentally abhorrent that in a city as rich as Edinburgh, we have people making choices between clothing their children, feeding themselves, or heating their homes. Those are choices nobody should have to face. The benefits and support universal systems should be far more supportive of people who need that support. And if it requires people to pay additional tax, and if it requires the Tories to tackle some more of their chums and actually paying the tax it's owed, as opposed to letting them get away with tax avoidance, some of them on their front bench, then I think that's a price I and everyone in the country should be willing to pay.
Councillor Kate Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thank you to the Council Leader for his report. Does he share with me concerns about the impact of this damaging Brexit process on the construction industry, and particularly on the construction of affordable homes? We know that costs are rising and the risks sit mainly around skills shortages and supply chains. And does he agree that far from providing a Brexit dividend, this damaging Tory Brexit process could jeopardise desperately needed affordable housing in this city?
Can I thank Councillor Campbell for the question? Absolutely, I agree in terms of the risk to our construction sector, not only in terms of the supply chain and labour market, but in terms of absolutely everything, the financial model that is being applied to some of these developments, and really every aspect of it, be them material supply, labour supply, or indeed capital supply. It is worth highlighting some of the positive work that is being done by the Council. Last week I was in Councillor Campbell's ward in Craigmillar to see some of the homes that we are building, which are absolutely fantastic units. It will be a fantastic community, which will be about 10-15 minutes from the city centre. So we are developing, I think, a very, very robust housing plan. Our affordable homes plan is going very well. The quality of the build is enormous, and that's something we shouldn't be willing to compromise on. But all of that success we are having right now is fundamentally undermined by the actions that are being taken by the UK Government right now.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you. I would also like to welcome Adam back. It's lovely to see you. I don't know if you'll feel the same way about me. Given the absolutely brutal massacre of the Kurds recently, when they've been abandoned by their so-called allies, and we now have a very fragile state of play there that's threatened every time Mr Trump says, well, words. I'm somewhat disconcerted to receive this, which is an invitation to celebrate the 96th anniversary of the proclamation of the Republic in Turkey, and this event is unfortunately being hosted in these chambers. Does the leader agree that this is not at this time an appropriate venue for, and we should not be hosting an event here that celebrates this?
Can I thank Councillor Ray for raising the point? Members may be aware that although the event is taking place in City Chambers, it's not being hosted by us in any official capacity. The booking was made as a private booking. So in that sense, this didn't cross my desk or anybody else's. On the substantive point about the action that Turkey is taking in Syria, I think it is absolutely reprehensible, especially with the ethnic dimension of the action that they're taking against the Kurds. Right now we are seeing a humanitarian crisis unfolding even worse in the region. And it's unfolding in a group of people who were, up until incredibly recently, fighting alongside the British soldiers and American soldiers and other Western people who were trying to make the world a safer place. The reports from the region are harrowing. There's reports of women being raped, there's reports of children being murdered by bombings. It cannot be condemned in the strongest possible terms enough, frankly, by myself or the Chamber. I think the action of the United States shows what happens when people succumb to populism, when people succumb to people who don't know what they're doing, who don't understand and don't want to understand the complexity of the world and see things as a purely black and white exercise. But the fault primarily rests with the Turkish government. They are not creating a safe zone. They are creating a zone where people are being bombed out of hospitals, bombed out of their homes and bombed out of their communities. So I hope that the international community takes stronger action in condemning the action of the United States and punishing the action of Turkey to try and bring a resolution as quickly as possible.
Councillor McNeese-Megan.
Thank you, Lord Provost. On a sort of slightly more cheerful note, a week from today, children across this city should be enjoying carving neeps, even possibly pumpkins, duking for apples. However, I was very concerned by a recent Guardian article that tells us that apple crops are rotting in orchards across Britain, and this is directly due to a shortage of EU workers. Scottish berry farmers are also being impacted. And also, it warned us that our Christmas dinner staples of neeps, carrots, parsnips, and Brussels sprouts are all at risk. Now, I know that many supporters of Brexit will be ideologically opposed to Brussels sprouts. I understand that. But does the Council leader share my real concern that at a time when we're doing wonderful work through Edinburgh, at a time when a lot of families are already struggling to put healthy meals on the table, that the basic crops that we grow here, the wonderful produce that we grow here in Scotland, across the UK, are all at risk of simply disappearing?
So I thank Councillor McNeese-Megan for that question. It is a labour supply problem, but the impacts are absolutely significant, just as Councillor McNeese-Megan has said. It will impact the food security of Scotland, absolutely, but it will also impact the environment, because when we are unable to farm land adequately because we have a shortage of labour supply, the only place that the market will have to go for that is the international market, and we'll see more goods, more food being traded as imports into the UK. That is not going to be good for the carbon emissions for the amount of food we consume, and it's certainly not going to be good for our diet, as the produce that we'll be consuming won't be as domestically produced and therefore fresh. I absolutely think that nutrition is the thing that is trying to be maintained throughout this process. I know, having had meetings as part of COSLA through the framework of contracts that all local authorities and public sector work on in Scotland, that they're doing a lot of work to try and find displacement products for the inevitable confusion and complications and difficulties that will be experienced by some products, Spanish tomatoes being an obvious example where recipes are having to be changed in our schools, etc. But the fundamental point is not only will this undermine our own capacity to grow our own foods in the capital, in the country, it will undermine our environmental credentials as well, as the food we consume will have a larger carbon impact. So it goes to, I think, show what 3/4 of the city already know, which is Brexit has literally no positives.
And as a result of time, the last question, Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thank you, Council Leader, for your report. In light of this week's announcement that the Castle Terrace car park has been awarded Category B listed status by Historic Environment Scotland, what financial impact do you see this having on the Council, bearing in mind that the Council will no longer be able to redevelop the site and the longer maintenance costs associated with it?
I thank Councillor Bridgman for the question. A curious decision, I think, for anyone that understands the architecture of the car park itself. I personally, and I'm speaking entirely personally, do not feel particularly inhibited by the designation of it. And I don't know whether the Council will therefore change plans or not, but that's my starting position for the negotiations and discussions we'll be having internally as an administration.
That takes you to item 7.1, which is appointments. The report is appointments to committee, and we have coalition and Conservative motions.
So, to move the coalition motion, Councillor Day.
For Lord Provost.
To second.
For.
And to move the Conservative motion, Councillor Rust.
Formally, Lord Provost.
To second, Councillor Mowat.
Formally, Lord Provost.
Agreed. Thank you.
Then that takes you to item 8.1. This is a report on the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal. Its annual report, annual conversation and the Regional Growth Framework update. We have a Conservative addendum, a Green addendum and a Liberal Democrat amendment.
Councillor McAfee.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. The City deal is going from strength to strength, and as the report identifies, more than around half the funding which we secured as part of the City Region deal, and funding has already been committed and is being spent across our capital and region. I should point out that the governance in this process can be a little complex, mainly because there's different work streams being worked on, there's different partners and at different layers, and different partners have different interests in different elements of it. But to confirm that the governance articulated in 4.22 does reflect the decisions that we've taken as a council already, and indeed have been taken on a regional basis at CESPLAN, etc. The element of this deal that I think is deriving the maximum benefit for our population and for our city as a whole is the skills programme. Because the skills programme is aiming to be an enabler of change, an enabler of linking our communities that have been disenfranchised by our economic development over decades, better connected to the opportunities that exist. Electric vehicle charging point installation is going to be one of the skills as part of that. Renewables for housing, infrastructure skills for roads, gender advancement projects for construction to ensure we have a genuinely gender-balanced skills programme that is not putting more men into work than women, that is accessible to all of our citizens. I think it's an incredibly good news story, and I think this will be the element of the City deal which best impacts on our society and our communities. I should say that I'm happy to accept the second part, but not the first part, of the Conservative addendum. The reason for that is in terms of the make-up of the Elected Member Oversight Committee. We will be bringing a report back to make that appointment, and we can have the discussion then. We're keen to understand more what our regional partners are going to be doing so that we can better set ourselves in with that. For example, if there's planning and transport spokespeople throughout that process, then we need to make sure that we're aligned to what's happening across the region. So we will bring back more information on how that's worked. If other local authorities are running with a similar model, then we'll, of course, be happy to look at that. I should say the fundamental point of the first part of the Conservative addendum, I think, is to ensure cross-party engagement in the process. And I'm more than happy to look at that, perhaps in our next leaders' meeting, how we can develop that forward to make sure that there is that cross-party engagement and everyone understands what's going on. And I've always tried to make sure that briefings are available, and I understand a number of members took advantage of the 2 briefings in the lead up to this report to make sure everyone knows what is happening. More than happy with the second part of the Conservative addendum. I think that reflects our ethos and our approach. Happy to accept the Green addendum also, and happy to accept the Liberal Democrat addendum as well. So hopefully, with all of that, the Conservatives will understand my rationale, and hopefully we'll find a consensus going forward. Thank you.
To second the paper, Councillor Day.
Thank you, Lord Provost. As the Council Leader said, a £1.5 billion investment in the City region, nearly £50 million on down in the last year alone, and over £700 million of projects and business cases approved, including fantastic resources like the Bays Centre, the National Roboterium, Edinburgh Futures Institute, and much, much more. This is fantastic news for the City. Lord Provost, I want to just commend Andy Nicholl and his team of staff who have led the exemplar work on the officer side of the City Region deal. The City Region deal shows great investment in our capital city, the wider region, the communities that we represent, brings huge opportunities to the city, and continues to put Edinburgh as a leading research and data capital centre of the world. and I second this motion.
To move the Conservative addendum, Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Lord Provost, given the comments from the Leader of the Council in relation to the first part of the amendment about the Oversight Committee and the commitment to bring that back here, if we have some sort of timescale for that, I'm very happy to withdraw the first part of the amendment there. And can I just say thank you very much to the Leader for accepting the other parts of the amendment. The addendum, I should say. Thank you.
To second the addendum, Councillor Mowat.
Formally, Lord Provost.
To move the addendum by the Green Group, Councillor Corbett.
Thanks, Lord Provost. As we all realise, all major projects or programmes are the products of their time, and the Cities Region deal isn't an exception to this. For those who have been around for a while, after a 2 or 3 year preparation period, really starting about 2014, the City Region deal was signed off in the summer of 2017, not long after this council was elected, and right on the back of the snap UK election. So I think most people would recognise that that wasn't the ideal context in which to conclude the negotiations, and there was a rush to get it over the line in the end. So we had early discussions about the City Region deal developing a regional energy master plan or a significant boost to public transport, and that kind of disappeared in those final months, and we were left with the Sheriff Hall roundabout as the signature transport project. So if we were signing the deal today, it would be a different deal. I think most people accept that. Not only was vital stuff lost in the last few weeks, last few months of negotiation, but the climate's changed, quite literally. The Council's declared a climate emergency since then, as have 3 of our 5 partner councils, Fife, West Lothian and East Lothian, as have Scottish Government and UK Parliament. But those declarations can sound a wee bit hollow if they're not backed by action and funding. And so we have here a 15-year programme with 1.3 billion of funding, which gives the potential to shape the regional economy for decades to come. And the only future for that economy is a low-carbon economy. Now, that's an immense challenge, but also a huge opportunity to seize the prospect of a green City Region deal to transform our economy. For example, by building regional transport infrastructure which boosts public transport, active travel and also advances electric freight movement, which develops regional food production and resilience, massive potential for our local growers and retailers, which develops new homes and neighbourhoods at the cutting edge of zero-carbon technology, with all that means for training and skills development, and harnessing the potential for new forms of energy production, distribution and efficiency, and so much more. The City Region deal is an exciting and remains an exciting prospect, and there's very encouraging progress been shown in the report today. But so much more exciting is a Green Region deal. It's an imperative, but also an opportunity. So let's seize that opportunity, and with that I propose the Green Amendment.
To second the Green Addendum.
Formally, Lord Provost.
To move the Liberal Democrat Amendment, Councillor Aldridge.
Thanks very much, Lord Provost, and I'm grateful to the Council Leader for the approach he's taken on this, the consensual approach. We had been hoping to find a means of being able to support all the amendments, and that has now been possible. And I would just like to echo his congratulations to our staff so far who have worked so hard on this to get so far so quickly. And the focus of our own amendment was simply to ensure that all of our major partners were reminded of a joint responsibility for resourcing, both in terms of personnel and perhaps in-kind support for this really exciting deal. Thanks very much, Lord Provost.
To second the amendment, Councillor Neil Ross.
Formerly, Lord Provost. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any hands, so Councillor McVeigh, perhaps if you want to address the issue of the timescale.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Just very briefly, the timescale I would imagine being next council, but I would ask for a little bit of leeway on that, because if we don't have things aligned yet, we have to wait for the governance to be set up. So if it does take a little bit longer in terms of a few more months, I'll of course inform the Chamber of that, but I would anticipate this coming back fairly quickly. I'm not imagining this being 12 to 18 months down the line. I imagine it being far quicker than that. So I hope that gives some reassurance. I did just want to pick up on the Green City Deal point, Lord Provost, because the City Deal was never an event of projects which would consign us to never ask for anything again. It was the first step in a process of making our city and region work better, making us more connected and making our economy work for more of our citizens. So the next step in that is to work with other partners, the UK, Scottish Government and our regional partners, to take the next step in that. And I think a Green Deal being the next step aligns with certainly our priorities and all our partners' priorities. And I look forward to the next iteration of what comes back in that field.
Okay, so we agree the report, including the amended Conservative addendum, the Greens addendum and the Lib Dem amendment. Thank you.
That takes you on to item 8.2. It's report on international travel and conferences. We have a Green amendment and a Liberal Democrat amendment.
Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm actually going to move continuation of this report just for tidying up a few issues. I have alerted the other parties and I think everyone's comfortable with that. There are some elements that we'd like to disaggregate and bring back so that we can have more focus. I appreciate there is an appetite in some quarters of the Chamber for some of the status quo balances and checks to remain in place. I think there's some sympathy with that in the administration, so I think continuing it and bringing it back next month gives us the opportunity to hopefully find a consensus position. Hopefully the Chamber will agree that.
Are we content to continue till next month? Thank you.
It takes you 8.3, which is a report on the audited annual report 2019 of the Lothian Pension Fund and Scottish Homes Pension Fund, including the annual report by the external auditor.
Councillor McVeigh, do you want to take this?
Thank you, Lord Provost. Yes. Thank you. I think we're happy to accept the majority of the Conservative amendment. There is a slight change that we would ask for in relation to point 3. Oh, sorry. Formally.
The second.
Formally, Lord Provost.
Are we agreed? Thank you.
That takes you to 8.4. This is the City of Edinburgh Council annual audit report to the Council on the Control of Audit, and we have a Conservative amendment.
Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you. What I said before. We are happy to accept. I think this should be relatively straightforward, as it was a referral from Finance and Resources Committee. There is a slight change that we would ask for in point 3, which I'm not sure has been communicated to the mover and seconder of the Conservative motion yet. No. Which I'll read out. So it would change the current text of point 3 to be request a report from the Chief Executive to the January 2020 meeting of Finance and Resources Committee for referral to the full Council budget meeting, setting out the Council's long-term strategic plans in order to better inform the 2020-21 budget process. The purpose of that is to try and articulate the plans that we have already in place and bring that back in a coherent way so that members, quite rightly, will be able to see the process as a whole in one package in the Finance and Resources Committee. I hope that's acceptable to the Conservative proposer and seconder, and with that I'll propose.
And to second?
Formally, Lord Provost.
To move the amendment by the Conservative group, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and thank you to the Council Leader for indicating his broad support for the amendment we brought forward. There has been some discussion this morning, which I'll come back to in a second. The purpose of this amendment, essentially, we're coming up for the 2020-21 budget process, as has already been mentioned by my colleague Councillor White this morning and was mentioned in the audit report which we are discussing. The Council has lacked a long-term financial strategy, and I think the purpose of bringing this amendment forward is to ensure that when, as a Council, we sit down in February and make our decisions on the budget, that these decisions are informed by everybody in the chamber being aware of what that long-term financial strategy is. The changes to our amendment, which the Council Leader proposed, I've spoken to colleagues this morning, and we have agreed on a wording which is almost identical to that which Councillor McVeigh put forward. So the wording I have is requests a report from the Chief Executive to be shared with councillors in time to inform the agenda for the January 2012 meeting of the Finance and Resources Committee. So it is essentially just to ensure that that information is available well in advance of the Finance and Resources meeting to all members. And if Councillor McVeigh is willing to accept those 5 extra words, then we are happy.
To second the amendment, Councillor Cook.
Well, given the bartering, I think we should do it formally, Lord Provost.
Munro.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Fellow councillors, I rise to draw the attention of all councillors to the import of the report here by the councillors' auditors. It contains some stark warnings about what is to come. Take a look at paragraphs 95 and 99 of the report. These advise us that in the light of the 2019-20 settlement from the Scottish Government, the cuts this Council has to make should be revised upwards. The current year cuts need to rise from 28 million to 41 million. The cuts to 22-23 need to rise from 106 million to 138 million. It also warns that should future settlements from the Scottish Government remain at the same level as this year's, then the figure of 138 million needs to be 150 million. That's 10% of the budget that needs to be cut. This is unsustainable. There isn't a councillor here that sought election to implement cuts on this scale on top of those already made. I welcome extra voices supporting my call for a full and fair settlement for the capital. I even think there are parts of the Conservative amendment that have merit, and apparently there's agreement in the room about that as well. But it will require all 63 of us to make the case for the capital. It will require the Council leadership, political and officers, to make the case to Holyrood, within and out with COSLA. It will require our parliamentarians in both parliaments to make the case. It will require our citizens to make the case for Edinburgh and their workplace. It will require our local press to make the case for Edinburgh too. Audit Scotland, in a report on council finances earlier this year, pointed out that since 2013-14, Edinburgh has had its budget cut in real terms by 11.4%. It further reported that council budgets spend on Scottish Government priorities has risen from 6.1% to 12.1% of their budgets. This has to stop. Some years ago at the Book Festival in Charlotte Square, I put a question to Gore Vidal that made the national press. I asked him if America needed another Paul Revere to wake his homeland out of its torpor. Paul Revere warned his fellow citizens to awake, awake, the British are coming. His warning led to others setting out to warn their fellow citizens of the invasion and was the beginning of the American Revolution. The level of the cuts is such that we all need to be Paul Revere going about the city warning, awake, awake, the cuts are coming. Read the audit report, act on its warnings. Our city needs to be fully and fairly funded.
Councillor Rankin.
Microphone now operating. I apologise for my absence. I mistimed just how long the previous item was going to take. But now that I am back, there are some things I would like to say about the motion and the amendments and what I think their actual value is. In my view is that if you look at what the Council has in place at the moment, we have a 10-year capital programme, we have a 3-year budget programme, we have a change strategy, and Scott Moncrieff agreed that that formed a solid basis for taking the Council's finances forward. And it seems to me that while I'm always in favour of evidence-based policy and therefore haven't opposed the Green amendment to this motion, that nevertheless I think there is a danger that we will be asking officers to spend time on something which, given the level of information that's available to us, is going to, and given the political uncertainties at the UK level, that I think it may well turn out that the value of this exercise is, at best, somewhat limited. I'm prepared to be surprised. I'm prepared to be found wrong, but I'm very much expect that I'll be proven to be right. And I think that any idea of long-term budgetary projections by any private sector organisation, any public sector organisation at the moment in the current political uncertainty at the UK level is really asking for more than can be realistically delivered. And I think that says something about the delusional nature of the path that we're going down at the UK level, where we have essentially we look like we're going to be implementing some sort of fantasy exit from the European Union, which will do nothing but damage us economically. It will damage our European neighbours and partners, and it makes the economic future more uncertain. The idea that there's any net benefit from what is being proposed by the UK government is simply not borne out by any reputable forecast. And I think it's highly regrettable that we have the sorts of remarks or the sorts of suggestions that we have about a long-term strategy when you have a government in Westminster which is actively making that vastly more difficult. And I think that is very much to be regretted. I also think that when it comes to talking about, I can see politically why people would want to pin the blame on the Scottish Government, and the Conservatives are happy to do it, and our coalition partners, Labour, some of them, those members have stood up and said, yes, let's pin all the blame on the Scottish Government, without taking into account the fact that the Scottish Government's budget in real terms has declined, at a time when there's a rising demand for public services, in education, in the health service, and in social care. Those are all substantially provided by the public sector. And when demand is rising for those services, to reduce them, the amount of money available for them in real terms seems completely irresponsible and economically counterproductive. So I will go along with this with some reluctance, but as I say, I somewhat doubt the value of the exercise and the extent to which it is a constructive use of officers' time. But I look forward, although I don't expect, to be surprised by what the findings are, because from my point of view, the evidence is already very substantially in, and we're talking about a period of enormous uncertainty which need not have happened at all. Thank you.
Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I'm afraid I don't think we are able to accept the slight tweak, although I appreciate the aim is to try and get us to a consensus. I am happy to give some reassurance that will be circulated to members of the committee as soon as practicable, but that may not be in the timescale identified by the slight tweak that the Conservatives are asking for. So I hope that assurance that as soon as it is able to be circulated, it will be circulated, is enough to allow the Conservatives to vote for the version that I read out at the start of this debate.
Councillor Hutchison, is that? As I understand, it's just been forward, the amendment, the verbal amendment which was proposed by Councillor McVeigh was to ensure that it was on the agenda. It was going to go to the next F&R committee, but it can't guarantee the timescale you asked in terms of being ready at the point of issuing the agenda. But he has given a verbal assurance. Are you comfortable with that?
I don't want to complicate this, so yes, largely, as long as we are comfortable that it can be circulated to all members of the Council when it's included in the agenda planning papers for F&R.
Yeah, give that commitment. It's fine. In which case, can we agree the paper and the Conservative amendment as verbally agreed in the Chamber? Thank you.
Takes you on to item 8.5. This again is a referral from the Financial Resources Committee. It's Bus Tracker Contract Award.
Councillor Rankin.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I'll be brief. The contract award was agreed by my committee without division on the 10th of this month. The report comes to Council for approval of the prudential borrowing that's needed to upgrade the existing bus station information system and the real-time passenger information displays across the city. The new systems will provide significant improvements in operating performance and complement existing measures which promote integrated public transport with the resulting reductions in maintenance requirements meeting in full the borrowing costs associated with this investment. So I commend the report to Council and approval of the related prudential borrowing. Thank you.
To second the report?
Formally, Lord Provost.
Okay. Are we agreed? Thank you.
Takes you on to item 9 motions. First one is 9.1 by Councillor Gardner on Edinburgh World Heritage.
Point of order, Lord Provost.
Yes, Councillor White.
Lord Provost, given the earlier circulation of the report on international travel contained the civic hospitality policy, which has already been agreed by the Council, and at 4.6 of that policy it says the celebration of major anniversaries should normally be restricted to multiples of 25 years up to 100 years, and thereafter multiples of 50 years. While I understand that policy is specifically about civic receptions, Lord Provost, and only 2 of 9.1, 9.2 and 9.7 2 don't specifically say a civic reception, but 1 does, are these motions competent, given that that policy is extant?
That's what I thought, but I'll repeat it. Council has the authority to overrule its own policy as it sees fit by taking decisions in this chamber. Therefore, the motions are competent. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm sure that everybody in this chamber recognises what the World Heritage designation means to us as a city, and that the body Edinburgh World Heritage has over the years maintained and enhanced that status and works hard across the board to do it. The status is more than just the buildings, the outstanding buildings in this city. It's also the people as part of the designation. And I just want to bring to the attention of the Chamber one particular thing that struck me when the World Heritage Body was looking at the Tron Church, and it did some outsource work in Craighour in the south of the city, where people had been taken in the 1950s from the High Street area and rehoused down in the south side, and their local church is also the Tron Church. But they weren't really aware of the history of this city, their city and our city. And so Edinburgh World Heritage, on the back of that, has gone out to build knowledge of Edinburgh and its history and its values, and has got information going out to primary schools to spread that knowledge across our city. So I just wanted to bring that particular one to your attention, because the role of Edinburgh World Heritage is diverse. It does things such as the greening of the Basil Spence tenement down in the Canongate, and many other activities which are very laudable. And on the back of that, I'm very happy to move this motion today, Lord Provost. Thank you.
To second the motion?
I'd formally second. Thank you.
I see no hands to speak. Are we agreed? Thank you.
9.2 is a motion by Councillor Fullerton on Hutchison Vale Football Club 80th anniversary.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Hutchison Vale is an institution. It was formed in 1940 to provide opportunities for boys in the Hutchison area and surrounding communities to play the game. Today, the club is based in Ford Road in Stockton and is surrounded by some of the most deprived and challenged communities in this, our capital city. Between 400 and 500 boys and girls now play for Hutchison Vale in 20 teams ranging from under-10s to under-20s. They also have a thriving junior academy for children between 5 and 8, and more than 30 volunteers coaching all these age groups. The club has very high standards and has an enviable track record of bringing players through its youth set-up into the professional game. It instills in its children a belief in themselves and the power of teamwork, discipline, respect and good conduct. Children from all walks of life are treated equally and inclusively. Finally, Lord Provost, I'd just like to pay credit to Tam Smith, the club leader. For the last 33 years, he has dedicated all his time to this club. His kind manner and approachable nature has made the club what it is today. Incidentally, Tam became leader after previous club leader Ma Bryson was given an indefinite ban for abusing the referee. So, quite an accolade for this wee club with a big heart. Thank you very much.
To second the motion.
Lord Provost, I think it's been well said, but I do want to stress the idea that this is not just a football club and not just a young people's football club. This is very much a strong player in the local community. Not only that, an advocate for sport and physical activity in young people for the whole city. So they well deserve this recognition, and I fully support this.
We agreed? Thank you.
Item 9.3 is a motion by Councillor Bird on respectful political debate.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm very pleased to propose this motion. Political debate is clearly something we are all immersed in daily, and I'm proud of the robust and informed shape that political discourse has taken in Scotland over the last few years of increasing democratic engagement. But I am concerned about the base nature of some of the commentary we've been hearing from members of the Westminster Parliament of late, which, if unchallenged, threatens not only to sow division in our society, but actually undermine confidence in our democracy and in those who represent it. I can't claim this motion was originally my idea, as should we pass it today, we'll follow the direction of the COSL leaders and President in standing up cross-party against dangerous and deeply unhelpful rhetoric of this kind. And I'm grateful to Councillor Watt for her motion to May's full council in calling out the inexcusable abuse that colleagues in this council have previously faced, and for the work that is being done on protocol as a result of this, and look forward to the outcome. Sadly, we have seen politicians of all parties targeted further afield as well as closer to home, and this is something that we must continue to work together to combat. Councillor Miller and I currently sit on the COSLA Special Interest Group on removing barriers to elected office, which is exploring measures to further support political participation. The most effective representative democracy needs truly diverse representation, and I think we can all agree that we have not yet achieved this in this place. We have a responsibility to ensure that political debate of all kinds is accessible to everyone, and that our behaviour as politicians only serves to enable this. At Policy and Sustainability Committee earlier this month, we discussed a number of human resources policies focusing on inclusion, diversity, domestic abuse and the gender pay gap. As councillors, we may not be subject to them, but they do serve as a welcome reminder that we are also all and only human. We're all passionate about what we do and the communities we represent, the attribute that most qualifies us for this role. We will, of course, quite rightly, continue to fervently disagree and sometimes get perilously close to agreeing on the matters that are most important to us. But we have to set the tone, both inside and outside this chamber, and it has to be one of consideration and mutual respect. We don't always get it right, myself included, but we have a duty of care, not only to our constituents and citizens, but to ourselves and to each other. We are in unprecedented times in our democratic journey as a country, and I know we are all keen to play our constructive part in whatever comes next. But there really is more that unites than divides us, and I hope that we can show that by passing this unanimously today. So in whatever forum, on whatever platform and around whatever issue, let's debate on the political, not the personal. Please support this motion.
To second the motion, Councillor Mandy Watt.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I want to thank Councillor Bird for bringing this motion. I think it's very important at this time for us to support each other and to support the institutions which govern our country at this time when we're making momentous decisions, for the rhetoric to be so disrespectful of institutions that have been built up over hundreds of years, or more recently welcome, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament, to improve our democracy and to improve the way that our laws govern this country. It's just so important
that they're shown respect, and that as politicians we lead by showing respect for each other. I think that's really, really important, and I would hope that Councillor Bird bringing this motion will make us all reflect upon that. Thank you.
Councillor Kate Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I wanted to start with a quote, not a famous quote, a quote from my ward colleague, Councillor Maureen Childs. I remember very early on after I became a councillor, she said something which stuck with me. She said, "They call you councillor out of respect, not for who you are as an individual, but out of respect for all of the people that you represent." I don't believe that any of us is here for any reason other than because we want a better society, but we have very different ideas on what that looks like. And sometimes it can get a bit passionate and a bit heated. So I'd like to thank Councillor Bird for bringing this motion because it has made me reflect on how I can be better. I hope this motion brings us together and that we will all take responsibility for setting a respectful tone both inside and outside of this chamber. This is even more important in a time when trust in politicians is at an all-time low. Politics has become a circus where larger-than-life personalities create headlines with tweets, where facts are relegated in favour of slogans and 4 words can make it round the globe before a reasoned, detailed analysis can put its boots on. We ask our constituents to put their trust in us to represent their best interests, and it is in no one's best interests for us to waste time bad-mouthing each other when we should be working together to find the best solutions for the challenges that our city faces. Hardly anyone knows who we are individually, but many people do know what a councillor is, and they lump us all in together. So when statements are made in this chamber, on social media or in print that are personal or attack the integrity of any one of us, it reflects poorly on all of us. But we also have to be clear, this is not about shutting down debate. It's about challenging each other on our policies. If we feel those policies are to the detriment of the people that we represent, it's about attacking the ball, not the player. I will continue, and I say this very specifically in the context of this debate, I will continue to challenge the welfare policies of the Tory government in Westminster because I believe those policies damage the life chances of my constituents and push people into poverty. I will continue to question the wisdom of a housing policy that would have meant 400 fewer affordable homes being built, and I will raise concerns that the UK government has moved workers' rights from the legally binding withdrawal agreement to the non-legally binding political declaration. And as a member of the administration, I expect opposition councillors to challenge and scrutinise us on the policies that we make and how we deliver them. It's not just their right to do so, it's their job to do so. A strong democracy is contingent on participation, and the politics of personal attacks make people disengage. But constructive debates that create better policies, a better city and a better society will engage our residents. I do believe that we can set a tone here that is respectful and at the same time gets better outcomes for the people that we represent. I hope all members will support the motion.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'd like to speak in favour of this motion from Councillor Bird and thank her for bringing it to the Council chamber today. As a relative newcomer to politics and elected office, I've been appalled by the traditions and the culture and the methods that some elected members and representatives think that are appropriate to achieve their political goals. It's been a bit of a sharp awakening for me, having seen it on the telly and in the press, to actually getting involved in the job and finding out what it's like at the coal face. I could see it from the outside, but I was still shocked, I think, when I found out how rough it can be. I've got a different personal code from those elected members in the way that I conduct myself. I try to focus on the arguments. I try to focus on the decisions and the issues that we're debating. And like Councillor Bird, sometimes I slip too. But that's on the whole the way that I try to conduct myself and my approach to my work. For example, I've made a really deliberate choice to be available to residents on social media, but also to really tightly manage the extent to which I share information, opinions, and provide hooks which would enable them to attack and troll me. And in person, again, I've made a really conscious choice to be accessible to residents, but I don't hold one-to-one meetings with any new person that I don't already know, having had some very early lessons on why it's unwise to trust that everybody's got my best interests at heart. And I mention this because all members here may not be aware that their words, their tone and their conduct and their treatment of colleagues does not remain sealed in the council chamber and in our committee meeting rooms. The way that they treat us on social media doesn't remain on social media, and it does bleed out into other forums. There isn't such a thing as a political bubble. I know that we talk about that and we check ourselves on whether we think we're in the bubble or out of the bubble, but it's not as simple as that. The movement of the words and the tone happens. And in reality, when vulnerable elected members go out into the world, into the streets, into their meetings in the community, into our pubs and into our social media, we're targeted with the weapons that more privileged members have unwittingly supplied. The impact for our health, both mental and physical, is unacceptable, as is the impact and the real threat to our safety. So I welcome this motion. I feel that it raises important points that we should take very seriously as members here. For those who don't make the same choices that I make about how I conduct myself and decide to engage in much more robust phrases and debates, perhaps they would like to reflect on those choices and think about the privilege that they hold when they make those choices and choose perhaps to change the ways in which those debates are conducted and think about the impacts that they have on other members. As a council, I think we can choose the way that we conduct our debates, and we have it within our power to do that. I would love to see consensus today and a tone adopted by this council that shows knowledge and understanding of the issues that we are raising in this debate and doesn't brush them to one side. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Councillor Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I caught your eye earlier because what I wanted to say was I thought that the contribution that Councillor Bird, my fellow ward councillor, made at the beginning of this debate was an extremely powerful exposition of the power of debate in this chamber. And it caused me to think very carefully about what you said, and it gives me no difficulty at all to support your motion, and I'd like to thank you for the power with which you spoke.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I too welcome the motion and the way in which Councillor Bird and indeed Councillor Miller and Councillor Campbell have also contributed to this debate. I would hope that my track record in this chamber and in all committee and council-related meetings that I do conduct myself in a way that is respectful. And notwithstanding the sort of slings and arrows that come at us, we all have different approaches to how we do this job, and it's for individuals to choose how they do that. It is tough at times, and I don't care so much about that personally, but what I do concern myself for is what message that sends out to people who would aspire to be elected members for this city. Because at the end of the day, we might be the least financially remunerated of elected members, but we do have the ability to really transform people's lives. And in undertaking the variety of council roles and responsibilities that I've had, that's what I have sought to do. In terms of misinformation and assumptions that people make, we don't know what we don't know about each other. And as people will well know in this chamber, recent coverage concerning myself, I just want to share something very briefly, which I was not going to share. But in my letter to Councillor Day, I did talk about the two chronic conditions I live with, endometriosis and extremely low blood pressure, which frequently affect my balance, my body temperature, cause fainting, nausea and vomiting, and sudden severe bouts of abdominal pain, lasting anywhere between half an hour and 2 hours or more. And as a result, my ability to walk, drive or travel safely and comfortably on buses and trams can be impaired. That is something that I have always tried to manage so that it doesn't interfere with my work and my other activities. But recently, council colleagues in my own group and in others have witnessed me taking ill suddenly 3 times whilst undertaking council-related duties, with one occasion resulting in an ambulance being called. So before people rush to make judgments, perhaps it is worth, as other speakers before me have urged, to just stop and think what you're really saying and why you are saying it, and what the motive is and what the impact is, not just on the individual, because, I can withstand, we're in this game of, it's not a game, I said that to Councillor Mitchell the other day, it's not a game, it's serious work that we do. And, earlier today when Councillor Dogger, made his remark about the taxi trade, there's things that you can, there's things you can pull each other's leg about, but sometimes the pursuit is more serious and more damaging, as I say, not just to the individual, but to those who we seek to serve, who maybe wish to aspire to come in here and do what they would like to do in terms of making life better for the residents of Edinburgh. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Councillor Rankin.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I think we would all agree in this chamber that we are living in very unusual, if not extraordinary, political times. And that's one of the reasons why the political temperature has risen to the extent it has. And my analysis would be that we are here at the moment for 3 essential reasons. The first one is to do with the financial crisis. The second one is to do with a wholly inappropriate response, which is to consolidate public finances at a time of economic recession, which means that a lot of people are pushed into hardship, and that is objectively what has happened. That's not an ideological point, that is absolutely what has happened, and it also flies in the face of all the accumulated knowledge that we've built up since the Great Depression in the early 30s. And I think we do need to remember that the best safety valve, I think, for these pressures is in proper and respectful democratic debate. And it's quite understandable that people's temperatures at times run high, but there are other elements to this. And if you look at the sorts of things that have appeared in the right-wing tabloids, describing judges, for example, as enemies of the people, others as traitors, and you hear Westminster MPs standing up in the House of Commons and saying that they feel threatened, they don't feel safe in their own constituency, or even when they step outside the secure boundaries of the Palace of Westminster. Those things are all, of course, to be deplored, and I'm really glad that no other elected representative, following the tragic and appalling assassination of Joe Cox MP, that nothing of that scale has happened since. And I earnestly hope, and I think everybody in this chamber would join me in earnestly hoping that that doesn't happen. And I think as elected representatives, we do bear a responsibility in the way in which we conduct our own business in setting an example to people. We may not be known individually as councillors, others in other positions or elected positions are perhaps more prominent, and to that extent the responsibility on them, in my mind, is all the greater. And I do think we need to see a way through this, but I earnestly hope that we will see a change in government policy which allows us to return to a more normal society, although I suspect that the sorts of policies that are in place and are likely to be in place will mean that political tensions will continue. And that means, to my mind, that our responsibilities in terms of how we conduct ourselves are all the greater. Thank you.
Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Lord Provost. I don't doubt the sincerity of the comments that have been made by any members in the course of this debate, and I think that the substance itself is something that we should welcome being brought forward. I'm sure there are all instances, being politicians, I'm sure if we admitted that sometimes we do like to use the sound of our own voices more than what we should. But what I would say, that actions do speak louder than words. I wrote in the Evening News recently about too often what's happened in this chamber in terms of the opposition bringing forward evidence-based arguments have not been engaged with, quite the opposite. And instead we get intensely personal or partisan diatribes So I do welcome the commitment that in future, and as we all want to do, we all have policy disagreements, but that we actually engage substantively with the arguments that are put forward, regardless of what corner of the chamber they come forward from. That's certainly something that we would welcome, and I'm sure all opposition parties, we don't have the same resources of officers or departmental staff, etc., go to the time to scrutinise things, to research things themselves. We don't have staff teams to do it for us. We are providing our role, fulfilling our role, and I think really the coalition should do more, as Councillor Campbell has said, to engage with those arguments in the same way that she wishes, quite rightly in a democracy, to engage on the policy disagreements that she has with the UK government. So I hope that the words spoken today have all been sincere, and we will see improvement across the chamber.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and I'd like to thank Councillor Bird for bringing this motion forward. I wasn't intending to speak, but unfortunately I feel that I have to. While I welcome Councillor Rankin's contribution, and he is certainly correct in that the recent 300 days, well, 3 years really, of the Brexit fiasco have certainly ramped up the rhetoric to an extreme level. This is, in fact, cannot be blamed for the current situation, because unfortunately at the core of the problem that we've been discussing is a deep-rooted misogyny that as women we in the chamber are facing on a daily basis in our work and in the streets. And as an example of that, let's have a look at some of the words that have been used in the press by certain members to describe women in this chamber. Being compared to a terrorist, being called a backstabber. The Green women have faces like scalped arses. We are ignorant, we are impudent and we are stupid. This is the language that is being used in this chamber to describe women, not men, women. It's been used in the press to describe women, not men, women. And if you use that language, then you are merely fueling a fire. And if you allow your colleagues to use that language, then you are complicit in what they are doing. And if there are consequences to that actions, you are also complicit in these consequences. So I sincerely hope that you feel you can live with that, because the consequences of these words have very, very different consequences for people, and they're very, very serious. They result in violence, they result in abuse, they result in people having to leave their homes. And if you're aware that this is happening and yet you still do nothing, then you are very much complicit in that too. So I would ask you to vote for Ellie's motion and to be much more aware of your words and your actions in this chamber and in your other jobs and in the streets. Thank you.
As every speaker has been in favour of the motion, I'm calling time on contributions at this point and say, are we agreed? Thank you.
The Lord Provost has indicated that he wishes to take items 9.4 and 9.5 together. We have a motion by Councillor Mary Campbell and a motion by Councillor Mitchell on the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and we also have a composite motion which has been circulated.
Councillor Mary Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I am saddened to bring this motion to Council today. It is awful that a day like this is needed at all. Transgender Day of Remembrance began when Rita Hester, a transgender African-American woman, was murdered in Allston, Massachusetts on November 28, 1998, and the outpouring of grief in her community was directed to remembrance, which has now turned into a global day of remembrance. For a group of people to be targeted for their existence is a sad state for the world to be in. This year has shown a 37% rise in hate crimes against trans people in the UK, which was 2,333 incidents. The UK has also sadly seen 2 deaths of trans people this year, 2 additions to the list of names of trans people who have lost their lives, which will be read out on November 20th. I have brought this motion so that Edinburgh Council can show that we support our trans citizens
and recognise the 324 trans people who were reported killed globally in the last 12 months. Of the reported killings worldwide, the most vulnerable people, migrants and sex workers, are the most likely victims. I would like to use the rest of my time reading some of the names of victims from the last year. These are not just names, though. These are people who have lost their lives, sometimes in the most painful and tragic circumstances. Amy Griffiths, Daniel Miriam, Diamond Dupree, Italy Marlowe, Alicia Stanley, Julia Jamar, Andrew Martinez, Bailey Reeves, B. Slater, Kalaya Quick, Pebbles Doe, Jordan Kofer, Kiki Fantroy, Tracy Single, Bubba Walker, Denali Stuckey, Cecilia Kranka, Brooklyn Lindsay, Zoe Spears, Leyland Polanco, Chanel Skurlock, Austin Smith, Chanel Lindsay, Johanna Leon, Titi Gully, Paris Cameron, Michelle Washington, Maisha Brooker, Claire Legato, Ashanti Kamen, Jasleen Ware, Faye, Ellie Washtalk, Dana Martin, Kiana Mattel, T.D. Downsbury, Regina Brown, Kiara Fraser, Bridget Escobar, J.A. Medina, Sasha Martinez, Joe Halil, Fanny Aguilar, Didema Kay, Defeni Yamaz, Gossi Sanji, Ezra, Handy Zecker, Sarah Fernandez, unknown women beaten to death in Spain, Rita, Alex Milokovic, Nika Surgetska, Lara Crespo, Mila Mazurkiewicz, Jessa Remindo, Teki, Claudia Vera, Carla Liriano, Brenda Andrade, Sana Khan, Hani Muskan, Nadia Maya, Amy Khan, Ama Hajani, Tabo, Etiana Hernandez, Ana Palo, unknown women shot in Mexico, Ashley Arbel Salazar, Aileen Gomez, Alondra Garcia, unknown women shot in Mexico, Sandy Bello, unknown women tortured and shot in Mexico, Carly, unknown women killed in Mexico, J.P. Moreno, Joni Sanchez, Brittany Zaretti, Jesusa Reyes, Natalia, Becky Reyna, Tamara, Kenya Hilton, Celaya Zalada, BJP, unknown women murdered in Mexico, Polita Ruiz, 2 unknown women tortured and shot in Mexico, unknown women shot and left in a rubbish pile in Mexico, Renata Spencer, La Mariposa, Bridget Galvin, Fabri Morales, Miriam Rivera, Pamela Ramirez, unknown women murdered in Mexico, Nashley Segovia, unknown women murdered in Mexico, unknown women shot in Mexico, Denisa Riviero, Gabby, unknown women shot 5 times in Mexico, Manuel Luna, Luisa Hernandez, Perlita Di Guerrero, Estrella, unknown women who took her life in Mexico, Janet Itzel Avila, Monse, unknown women thrown from a vehicle in Malaysia, unknown women beaten to death by a gang in Malaysia, Victoria Nancy de Monza, Rina, unknown women killed by a mob in India, Gurpreet, Rekha Desai, Shalu Nazab Sheikh, Rajathi, Alka, S. Biswaz, Bessie Ferreira, Santiago Carvalho, Antonia Larias, Shakira, Fabiola, and Wilma Rapello. These are just a few of the names on this year's list, and I would like to move this motion, and I hope that we can remember that words do have real impact on people's lives, and that Transgender Day of Remembrance is a chance to reflect on that. Thank you.
To second the motion.
Lord Provost, just this week, a thankfully small group of reactionaries started a group, an LGB group, quite deliberately and pointedly leaving out the T. This motion is important because we need to remind ourselves what such small-minded transphobia leads to. Transphobia leads to physical and mental violence, which leads inevitably to murder and to suicide. We must support the Transgender Day of Remembrance to remind both ourselves and this city of the damage, the serious damage that transphobia does to our communities. Thank you.
To move your motion, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. Yes, I'm going to move mine. I'm very glad that, having met with and spoken with Councillor Mary Campbell, that we have agreed a composite beyond our two motions. I think, in general, I mean, I'm going to sort of repeat what I said at Edinburgh Pride earlier this year. So Councillor Cameron, Councillor Osler and Councillor Day will be familiar with some of the words I say, which is the sorts of symbols that these flags represent. I mean, for some people it is indeed just token gestures, like what does it mean flying another flag? But I think that in this sort of circumstance, you know, I do genuinely believe that this sort of thing, whichever civic building it's flying outside, whether it's outside a business, hanging in a window, these sorts of symbols say that we see you and we hear you and we are with you. And I hope that that is seen and heard with all sincerity, actually, particularly given what has happened down south with the LGB group. I do agree that not flying the rainbow flag on this occasion is absolutely appropriate, and I'm really pleased at the composite that Councillor Campbell and I worked on together. So yes, I formally move my motion anyway.
And to second the motion?
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm happy to second the motion, and I'll do so formally. Thank you.
All three speakers have spoken very well, and as Councillor Mitchell indicated, there is an agreed composite amendment of Councillor Mary Campbell's motion and Councillor Max Mitchell's motion, which has been circulated. I think we can take it as formally that this is the one that we're going to agree. Can we all agree that? Okay, thank you.
That takes you on to item 9.6. Is a motion by Councillor Barry into proposed amendments to the committee terms of reference and delegated functions.
Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Lord Provost. As I speak today, I would like members to reflect on Councillor Bird's motion 9.3, where we've just heard everybody say that we will respect each other in political debate, we will respect each other's roles in this council, and there should be engagement. Some number of days ago, I wrote to all the group leaders regarding this motion, asking for engagement, if necessary, prior to this meeting. Apart from the Lib Dems, the silence has been deafening. And yet today, I am aware that this motion will be voted down if moved in these terms. So let me move on. Let me begin with a quote from the Scottish Government website that describes the role of a local authority councillor. It states, in amongst other duties, that one of our key roles is scrutiny of decisions. Councillors may serve on scrutiny panels or committees, which scrutinise existing policies and service delivery, and also regulatory functions, where some council committees such as these deal with planning and licence applications and have a quasi-judicial role. And of course the text is correct. That is the job of elected members in this and every other council in the country. What it doesn't say, and I would argue quite rightly, is that the only councillors that can sit on these committees are those that belong to political parties. And of course, this omission is correct as well, because as we all know, there is no rule or regulation that to be elected as a councillor, you must be a member of a political party. And in many councils around the country, their committees are made up of and include independent members. And yet, because of the way our committee terms of reference and delegated functions are written, those elected members who, for whatever reason, are not members of political parties are debarred from carrying out some of the primary functions they were elected to do. In any other role of employment, maintaining a rule such as this would have grounds for constructive dismissal, Quite frankly, it's a disgrace. This motion was an attempt to remedy this situation. But given the fact that, in my certain knowledge, it will be voted down, I have to inform the Council today I'm withdrawing this motion, not moving it, and inform the Chamber that 3 of the independent councillors will notify the Lord Provost and the Chief Exec by close of business today that we are forming a political group and taking steps to comply with the current terms of reference and all that this entitles us to. I am withdrawing the motion.
That takes you on to item 9.7. This is a motion by Councillor Gloyer, Civic Reception for the Edinburgh Film Guild.
Councillor Gloyer.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Even people that go to the cinema a lot, and even people that go to Filmhouse a lot, often have no idea that Edinburgh is home to the oldest continually running film society in the world, the Edinburgh Film Guild. It was established in 1929 by luminaries of Scottish film and Scottish film studies, Forsyth Hardy, Norman Wilson and others. They were inspired by the Film Society, which had been set up in London a few years earlier in 1925. And yet, as John Grierson wrote 2 decades later, the old London Film Society was the first to break from somewhat exclusive attention to the avant-garde and take the longer and harder way of the Russians and more purposive users of the cinema. But it was the Edinburgh Film Guild which completed the movement, as the London Film Society did not, and saw the infinite variety of a film society's obligations to all categories of the medium. From the start, the Edinburgh Film Guild screened a wide variety of films. There were classics from the silent era, which at the time was just drawing to its end. There were documentaries such as Grierson's Drifters, which had incidentally been premiered in 1929 by the London Film Society and was reviewed for the Scotsman by Forsyth Hardy. There were international films, including the first screenings in the UK of Ingmar Bergman's earliest works. We continue this tradition to this day. We screen over 60 films a year for our members. In this 90th year, our programme includes Chinese, Hungarian, Japanese and Mexican films, British crime thrillers and film noir, sci-fi, giallo and westerns. And this year it also includes a mini-season of films from the first years of the Guild by directors such as Pabst and Sternberg. The London Film Society closed in 1939, but the Edinburgh Film Guild kept going. In 1947, Hardy, Wilson and other stalwarts of the Guild were dismayed to realise that the new Edinburgh International Festival would not include any films. So they decided that the solution was for the Guild to organise its own international festival of documentary films. That first film festival was opened by John Grierson, who had recently returned to the UK from setting up and serving on the National Film Board of Canada. And it ran alongside the official international festival. Over the years, it expanded to include, as well as documentaries, feature films and experimental films, and these are still 3 of the main strands in the Edinburgh International Film Festival. The Guild not only screens films for its members, it's also an educational charity. We run film and media courses, often in conjunction with lifelong learning at the University of Edinburgh. We've sponsored lectures, called the Forsyth Hardy Lectures, as part of the film festival. All our activities are run by volunteer members of the Guild. We have our own dinky little 31-seat cinema within Filmhouse. We have a club room where members can relax before or after our screenings and chat to each other or argue with each other about the films that they've seen. We welcome new members. You can become one for as little as £25. The Edinburgh Film Guild has been contributing to the city's cultural life and educating our citizens about cinema for 9 decades. I hope, Lord Provost, that everyone in this chamber will join me in requesting a fitting commemoration of these 90 years of contribution. Thank you.
To second the motion.
Thank you, Lord Provost. And thank you to Councillor Glower for asking me to second this motion. The Film Guild is an amazing Edinburgh institution who offer a wide-ranging programme of films from British silent film, German documentaries and Albanian cinema to screwball comedies, George Romero films or Jackie Chan's early work. Sadly, they operate slightly under the radar, but the city owes them a great debt for starting the Edinburgh International Film Festival, which is now heading for its 74th year, enjoyed by thousands of city residents. I hope this motion highlights to the city the amazing work the Film Guild are doing and encourages Edinburgh residents to join up and enjoy their excellent programme of films. I am happy to second this motion.
I see no other hands. Will be agreed? Thank you.
Item 9.8 has already been considered, which takes you to item 9.9. It's a motion by Councillor Mowat on Film Charter and Principles.
Councillor Mowat.
Thank you, Lord Provost. My eyes are on the clock, and with your notification of what time we're having lunch today, I will be brief, because I realise it is only my last two motions that are holding you back from your lunch. Obviously, the Fast and Furious filming and latterly the Eurovision filming caused quite a lot of concern in the city centre this summer. But I didn't want to bring forward a motion which was just about the negatives, because there are positives. So I welcome the tidying up exercise that the administration have proposed in their amendment, and I would ask, just as long as the costs that we have are detailed are within that report, I'm happy to accept that amendment. I think one of the highlights, well, it wasn't really a highlight of a very busy summer's inbox this year, was the notification of the irony that we've had a film of very fast cars going through the city at speed after we'd tried to increase the safety of our streets by closing a lot of them down to traffic. However, having reviewed things, that is not an area that we can control when we are trying to be positive about filming, so we just need to deal with the fallout. And I take this opportunity to reiterate the costs and the benefits of filming in the city. So I so move my motion.
To second the motion?
I'll be brief, Lord Provost. I think it's essential as a global capital city, and we want this type of publicity. We want to be regarded as an A location and attract the big names, but we have to know what's costing us and the benefits that we can gain as a local authority and that our taxpayers can potentially gain in terms of funding or whatever else it may be of these huge productions coming to the city. I'd simply, on a slightly lighter note, hope that the Council can look at how we can better engage with these productions, and specifically some of the stars that come to the city. Councillor Arthur and I are known to spar on Twitter on all manner of things. And indeed, we did get some low-level publicity for our sparring as regards Vin Diesel and Vin Diesel's visit to the city. Unfortunately, he needs some better representation because he didn't respond to either of us. So it's essential that we grasp the positives and also be aware of the negatives. I'll second the motion.
To move the coalition amendment, Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and grateful to Councillor Mowat for accepting our amendment. The purpose is exactly to do that. The known costs that we have as a city and the benefits in terms of revenue and other things will be brought forward in that report, so I'll just move that formally.
To second.
Formally, Lord Provost.
Are we agreed? Thank you.
Takes on to item 9.10. Again, it's a motion by Councillor Mowat into a claim for an award of expenses in the appeal PPA 230-2207, and we have a coalition amendment as well.
Councillor Mowat.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm afraid I won't be quite as brief on this one. It didn't bring me any particular pleasure to have to bring this forward, but I think it says something. How we deal with this will say something about our attitude to what happens when we have difficult findings made against us. This is an appeal judgment. The application was heard in the dying days of the previous council administration, and not only did we lose the appeal, but it was also lost the claim of expenses against it, which is actually really quite serious. So I bring this forward because, and my ask in this is really specifically about making sure that we review this independently. Because as an organisation, you can do two things when you get a bad finding against you. You can sit there, say, walk along now, dear, we'll review this and we'll look at this and everything's all right. Or you can throw in the sunlight of disinfectant, say, right, we've done wrong, how do we make it better, how do we go forward? And why this is important and why I felt I should bring this to Council and do this is because this concerns planning applications. We heard today from the convener of Housing and Fair Work that housing and delivering housing is really, really important to the Council. It is a priority. We can't do that unless we have confidence in our planning system that we are working effectively within our policies, and that not only do we have confidence, but the people outside have confidence, because that saves us time in the long run. The process of planning can take a long time. That time, if people have to achieve that by going through appeals, is time lost in building houses. So it makes it take longer for people to get houses. And we all agree in this chamber that people need houses, and it's one of the biggest challenges. So what I'm asking here is for an independent review of this decision and the other decisions on major appeal sites. Major sites is a specific planning term where we have lost them. Now, when I say independent, I've been deliberately loose in my use of that term, because I think you can interpret independence as being independent of the directorate that the department sits in, so it could be within the council. But why I didn't specify is because it's about resources, and whether there are resources within the council, another part of the council that could oversee this, or whether we want to call in one of our framework agreements, or whether we need to go externally from the council. And the way I would suggest that we manage this is that in consultation with officers, if this motion is agreed, it's agreed the nature of that independent and the extent of the review would be agreed with the lead spokesman of planning, the convener of planning, and other council leads on planning. So I move my motion.
Do you second the motion?
Formally.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. To move the coalition amendment, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Lord Provost, and I'd like to thank Councillor Mowat. Councillor Mowat? Councillor Mowat? I would like to thank you for bringing this motion to the Chamber, and it is something that the administration also takes very seriously, the nature of delivering an effective planning service. I know I'm holding you from your lunch, but I just want to go into some of the details, because you're absolutely right, it's an important thing that we need to consider. The motion asks for a report detailing planning appeals that have been allowed and for an independent review of these decisions in the light of national and local policy. The motion doesn't currently place a time frame on this. However, a logical starting point would be the adoption of the Edinburgh LDP in November 2016. From this date, the authority has had in place an up-to-date plan that's less than 5 years old and therefore carries significant weight in planning decisions. An extract of the appeal decisions, I had an extract of the appeal decisions, and some of them, a good number of them, are actually in our favour. Significant ones in our favour being include, in my own ward, Rickerton Mains development there, which was non-compliant, and our appeal was upheld. Our decision was upheld. Also, Glenbrook Road in Balerno, again, our decision was upheld. So, a balanced interpretation of where we are is that there is good work being done by the department. Obviously, this particular finding, there is issues that need to be looked at. So, excuse me a second. And further to investigation, the planning system, and this is something that Councillor Mowat did touch on, the planning system already provides an independent review system for the council decisions, and that's via the appeals process itself. So the Scottish Government has looked into this, and they found that we were deficient in this particular one. That's the basis of the motion, and it is only one, I think, that we're talking about. And so that has been looked at, and we do need to take account of the findings. The Council treats these decisions as material considerations in subsequent related cases. The Council's decisions on planning applications will ultimately always be a matter of planning judgment, so the reporter's decision was a matter of planning judgment. Once planning permission is issued, parties are entitled to rely upon its terms and permissions can be only revoked through the courts. Any planning consultant who might have been appointed as an independent reviewer to carry out this may enter into a different opinion. And the danger with that is it might be a different opinion to what we'd reached and could undermine, this has the potential to undermine the standing of the Council's own decisions, causing reputational damage and increasing the prospects for a legal challenge for developers and third parties on either these or on future decisions. So I think that we need to be very careful who we consider to be an independent reviewer here. The government's already reviewed it. I'd be wary going out to the private sector for any review. And that was why I brought forward the motion that the staff would carry out a review and bring that back to the very able scrutiny of the Planning Committee, Councillor Mowat and other planning members included. So a broad independent review of the Council's decision in terms of national and local policies not considered to be appropriate, given what I was saying about each decision reviewed by each party on its own merits. Such a review has the potential to seriously undermine the authority of this Council as a planning authority, and my constituents in Glenbrook Road and Riccarton would not thank you for that in determining planning applications, and could cause us serious reputational damage. That's why I was seeking to bring forward the motion about bringing this in 2 cycles. I feel that's sufficient time to deal with it, and offering up the report. I'm aware that there isn't universal support in this chamber, though I would take Councillor Miller on at face value and ask that members do consider the arguments put forward and not vote en masse. But nonetheless, I suspect I'm not going to hold the day here. So if we can agree and I do not want to put this Council to extra cost either. This is all about award of costs. I don't see the point of bringing one of the big 4 accountancy consultancies or anything like that in to scrutinise. If we can agree to do this in-house but have impartiality from a different department, I think that is a way forward. And rather than taking it to the vote, if Councillor Mowat can agree on the time frame, 2 cycles, and we can agree between us who that is, then I think on balance I'm prepared to withdraw my motion because it's not going to carry support.
Is Councillor Mowat willing to agree to the points that Councillor Gardner has just made?
Yes, if this is a case of independent being interpreted as independent from another directorate of the Council, then I would be happy to do that. I think the case it's about not marking your own homework, given that with third parties already said we were deficient.
I think that's what you meant, Councillor Gardner.
Yes, I think that is acceptable to me. Thank you.
We agreed then? Thank you. That brings us to the end of the business, so thank everybody for their attendance and for their contributions. If I can just leave you with one thought for next Council. In asking questions, can I just remind her, I know it says ask questions, but you only get 1 each. And there have been many instances today of multiple questions. Can I ask you just to think on that for the next committee meeting, for the next Council meeting? Thank you.